Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Robert Holden, Deputy Director, National Congress, American Indians, Choctaw and Chickasaw. Just doing an opening here, and I'll be in and out. We were starting the Executive Council winter session, as you know, today. This was one of our breakout sessions, one of several. To me, it's very critical. To me, I guess I have always hoped to have a hand in what goes on here. Been involved in Native voter activities for a number of years. I don't need to tell you how far that goes back, but nevertheless, it's probably older than some of you in this room. But since that time, I've seen a tremendous surge of activity. Seen many things evolved in a positive way in terms of not only the participation, but what can happen, how it happens. The people right down here in the street in this Capitol building, the people at the other end of that mall in the White House. Some of those folks are placed within some of these agencies. You see a lot of the federal agency buildings here. Some of those folks are Native. That didn't come by accident, folks. I don't need to tell you. I don't want to preach to the choir. I'm not here to proselytize. I'm just saying I want to thank all of you who have been engaged for doing that. What it's brought, that it has borne fruit. And those who are just coming in to these activities, that we need your help. We look forward to working with you. I have a good friend who's was a senator in the state legislature from Oklahoma. He's an artist, very good speaker, Senator Kelly Haney. He was chief at the Seminole Nation for a while. He also was a representative in the state legislature. When he was in the House, there was a very important issue that he wanted support on that would help Native people in the state. One of his fiercest opponents was a non-Native from a close jurisdiction. As you know, Oklahoma, there's a lot of tribes, a lot of Native people dispersed throughout that state. Still Indian territory to us. But nevertheless, this man was opposed to his bill. So he did some research, checking on this guy and his voting record, so forth, his term of office, just different things about him. So on the day before this critical vote, he walked up to him and said, "Representative, I understand that you have a significant number of Native people in your district." He said, "Well, yes, I do. I have to say that some of them have been quite supportive." So, well, as I understand, you won your last election by 6 votes. He said, "Well, that's true." So let me tell you, sir, that's 1 carload of Indians. That guy changed his vote, voted with the Representative Haney at that time. That's just one example, and that was several years ago. We can do more with your help, whatever way you can help. You can be the catalyst to other people. You can be the catalyst to those around you. You have a sphere of influence, whether you realize it or not. As you grow older, you'll see how far that sphere can spread. So really, it does me good. Makes me feel good to see all of you here. NCAI will take it upon ourselves to assist you in any way we can. These folks here at the table will help you in any way they can. They've been engaged. They're committed. They have many good things to say. So thank you. Thank you so much, and have a good session.
Thank you, Robert. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Peter Morris. I also work for NCAI as the Director of Strategy and Partnerships. And as you just heard, NCAI has a deep institutional commitment to Native Vote. Robert didn't say it, and now he's left the room. I can say it. He's been working on Native Vote since the Reagan administration and before, when, as he said, some of you were yet to join us in the world. And so it's great to have such a diverse array of tribal leaders and Native youth in the room today to have this conversation. And we're also videoing the conversation, as you can tell by the wonderful makeup we've all put on. I left the guy liner behind today, but otherwise we're all in pretty good shape. And we're going to be sharing this on the Native Vote website. It'll be posted tomorrow, so folks at home, if you'd like to share it with them, you can do that. And I want to start some of the context setting for NCAI's Native Vote campaign by actually asking you to think about the people who aren't here in this room. I wonder if you can think about one or two people in your community who you love, who you care about, who aren't here today. And the context for Native Vote in Indian country is if you hold two of those people in your mind right now, imagine you having a voice, one of those other people having a voice. But one of those people not being able to tell you what they care about, not being able to share with you their stories, their experiences, what's important to them. The context in Indian country and the urgency of the Native Vote is because of the fact that in 2008, 1 million Native people, more than that, were not registered to vote. Eligible voters not registered to vote. And what that means is 1 in every 3 Native people were not registered to vote, which means their voice wasn't heard in national and state and local elections. And that challenges some of the priorities we all care about. And as Robert said, many of the folks in this room are people who are here because your community is proud of you, are here because you're being sent as a representative of your community and you have influence. And so what we're here to do this morning is to urge folks to take that burden, to think about that 1 in every 3 people in your community who's not registered to vote, and think about how we can go about addressing that challenge. Another number I want to throw at you is 500,000. There are more than 500,000 Native young people between the ages of 15 and 19 right now, which means that those 500,000 people will be starting college or going to vocational school. They'll be voting, they'll be participating in communities. It's a key moment for Indian country. That's almost 10% of the Native population that is between the ages of 15 and 19. We have an urgent opportunity to be able to engage and turn out additional Native voters. And we know from things like the second successful write-in campaign for the U.S. Senate in American history. Senator Lisa Murkowski will tell you that she gets to be called Senator Murkowski and not just Lisa because of the Native vote. Senator John Tester will tell you the same thing. He's not just a guy with a cool haircut in the Senate. He's a guy who's there because of Indian country. And so as we think about Native vote today, that's the kind of context we're thinking about. An urgent opportunity, a moment where we can really make a difference. And NCAI as an institution has been committed to the Native vote since the very beginning. In 1944, when the institution was founded, there were Native veterans coming back from the Second World War who were not eligible to vote in states like Arizona and New Mexico. And that was a burden that the founders of NCAI carried with them. Many folks in this room have seen that photo of NCAI's founders in the Embassy of Tribal Nations, and that photo is of people who were committed to fighting for the Native vote, for fighting for Indian country's voice to be heard. And our President, Jefferson Keel, himself a veteran, at the State of Indian Nations address just a month and a bit ago over at the museum on the other side of town, set the ambitious goal of the highest Native turnout ever for the 2012 election, which is why we have you here, which is why we're videoing this, which is why we have this great collection of partners here. Because to achieve that goal, we need everyone. To achieve that goal, we need to connect some of the partners outside of Indian country you'll be hearing from shortly, to be able to use tools that are already in existence to connect tribes and Native communities to ways that will help us to work smarter, to be able to identify potential voters in our communities who aren't registered to vote, and to help educate them about the issues and turn them out. Quick overview, and you all have a great packet of information our Native Vote team pulled together, and I just want to run through a couple of quick features of it. There are two things at the back: a lovely baby blue top, which you can take home, so don't worry about that, pledge card, and the bottom tearaway. We'd encourage you to have a look at this pledge card and to fill it out today during the session or throughout the conference. And the registration table will accept these pledge cards throughout the conference. We would love to hear from you the kind of things that you're willing to do to get out the Native vote in your community. We're also doing a survey to do some more analysis of how tribes work to increase turnout in national elections. And there's this survey, when do you vote, tribal and national elections, that we'd encourage you to take the chance to fill out at some point during the session today and maybe leave with us. We'll also be talking about this in General Assembly on Tuesday and Wednesday. You have a copy of our Native Vote Toolkit, so I'm not going to take up much more time talking about that. Just to say, we have 4 elements of our campaign: a Get Out the Native Vote and voter registration element of that campaign, which I talked about, and you're going to be exposed to some tools that we're offering to tribes and really trying to connect tribes with in different states. Election and voter protection, which all of you know is a significant challenge in Indian country. Voter education, which is about educating Native citizens about the issues that affect them, but also engaging candidates, both Native candidates running for office, and we all know we need more Native people running for office, and Peggy and others on the panel will talk about that. And also engaging candidates for every office to think about developing an Indian platform and having key positions on policies that are important to Indian country. And finally, the question of data, and we have some folks in the room from our Policy Research Center at NCAI. We're really trying to get a tighter grip on where are those places where voter turnout is really high. So I gave you that statistic about 1 million, 1 in 3 Native voters who aren't registered to vote, but we know there are places like the Fort Belknap Reservation, a number of the pueblos in New Mexico, a range of places around the country where turnout is higher than almost any other place, 90+% in some communities. So we need to get our hands on the data to better understand what works and what kind of things do we need to focus on in different communities. The flow of the session, and this is the top sheet in your packet there, the flow of the session for this morning will be as follows. We'll hear from Heather Smith, who is the president of Rock the Vote, and we're really privileged to have Heather here with us. Victor Sanchez, who's the president of the U.S. Students Association, is also doing some partnership work with us around engaging Native students. He is caught somewhere in the Midwest between Portland and here. He was flying here last night and only made it halfway. So he has committed to being on a Native Vote webinar. So for those in the room who fill out the pledge card, you'll get the information on that as a follow-up event. It'll give us more time to visit with Heather and hear from her about the youth vote activities. We'll have a little bit of discussion about turning out Native youth voters, and we have a number of folks from the NCAI Youth Commission in the room right now. And then we'll talk a little bit more about building a successful Native vote campaign with Peggy Flanagan, she's got a long title, Native American Leadership Program Director at Wellstone Action. She was NCAI's Native Vote Coordinator in 2006, I think. And Cietta Kiandoli, who is the Program Director for State Voices, which has some really great partnership opportunities in a number of states where their focus overlaps with the Native Vote campaign's focus. So that's kind of where I want to hand over the mic and have some American accent speak for a little bit. So I will turn it over to Heather Smith, again, president of Rock the Vote, a campaign which she'll tell you a lot more about, which is about turning out and registering youth voters. And it's just a real pleasure and privilege to have you here, Heather. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. All right. So thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I am a big fan of all the work that you all do and have done over the past many years on the Native Vote campaign. And I'm excited that this year we're going to get the opportunity to work together. So I was asked to tell you a little bit about who Rock the Vote is, our story, as well as some of the programs that we're running this year, hopefully give you some concrete ideas of the type of work that we do. Maybe there's things that can be applied to your own communities or your own programs and work, as well as suggest a couple ways that we might actually work together as we gear up for the major elections happening this November. So I'll just take maybe 10 minutes, and then I'd rather have a conversation with all of you than talk at you. But as I think we heard in the opening comments, this is a story of voting, but it's also a story of power, and the power that we have as a community that you have in your own communities, and the community that I spend most of my time thinking about are young people, kind of from all communities, so 18 to 29-year-olds in this country. And it was in the early 90s, so 1992, there were a number of issues that were at stake that had to do with young people. And in particular, there was one issue that had to do with censorship, freedom of speech, artistic expression, and they were censoring the kind of music that people could listen to. And the music industry at the time decided that this was outrageous, that they wouldn't stand for censorship of music and restrictions on freedom of expression in our country, and they were going to go to D.C. and testify in Congress. And so you have these rock stars, right, like Iggy Pop and Two Live Crew and all these folks that you really wouldn't expect to see in Washington, D.C., lobbying in the halls of Congress and testifying and calling for the protection of speech. So you might not have to like the music, but you still can't censor it, right? And what they discovered in this process is that while they believed in something that was absolutely right, and as individuals are exercising their right to protest, to testify, to have a say in our government, without a whole base of supporters and a community behind them, they didn't have the power to influence those decisions that were being made. And when decision-making came and time came for those that we elected to make decisions, without a political power base, without tons of young people behind them, they didn't have the real power they needed to influence those decisions. So fortunately for these musicians, they were speaking to young people every single day by the millions, right? From the concert stage, through their commercials, through the records and music they were making. So they decided to use their voice to reach young people, and not just perform and sing songs, but also to ask those young people to get involved in the political process. At that time in our country, only 1 out of 3 young people were registered and voting. Turnout was 36%. So you guys, actually in Indian country, are a little ahead of that, right? But there was a real lack of power. So these musicians got together and they created PSAs. And while they were singing about their music, they were also going on television shows like MTV and calling for people to call a 1-800 number. It was 1-800-CALL-RTV. And there was people on the other end of the line who were taking the call, and they were filling out a form, and they were mailing it to you, and you could fax it back and sign it. And it wasn't very high-tech back then, but a few 100,000 people got registered, and millions of young people for the first time heard talk and conversation about voting and civics in a way that was relevant to them. They started paying attention. Well, fast forward now 21 years, or 20 years or so, and youth turnout has been on the rise for the past 3 or 4 major election cycles. In the 2008 elections, young people voted at 52%, which is the highest rate of turnout for young people ever in the history of our country. Instead of 1 in 3, it's 1 in 2. And we continue to make great strides. And as a result, these young people in our country have a lot more power. And now when decisions are being made, it's not quite as easy to throw them under the bus and put their own priorities last. So we have a long ways to go. 52% is not what it could be. But we, over the past 20 years, I think, have figured out some strategies to help us get closer to building real political power for young people and making sure that the issues that we care about and that these young generations and many of you care about get paid attention to. Doesn't mean you always get your way, but at least you get heard. And so I'll tell you a little bit about our approach. We think there's 2 barriers to real participation amongst young adults. One is the relevancy. So if you turn on the TV, I don't know, today, And the conversation that's happening, it's not always about the things that actually are your daily concerns and that you're thinking about every day, right? And so what happens is the conversation becomes about, let's say, Medicare and Social Security. And as a result, people who are directly affected by that are paying much more attention. They then tend to turn out and vote. Because they're voting, their issues get talked about. And because of that, then politics feels very relevant to them. It's a decision that affects their lives every day, and so they vote. Because they're voting, their issues get paid attention to. So we need to kind of flip that cycle around and start putting our issues out really big and saying, hey, this is what we care about. Pay attention to these issues. Once those issues start getting talked about, then I think politics becomes much more relevant to young people. It seems to say, oh, I have a say in this. This is about me. It's not about someone else. Okay, I'm going to participate. And when you start participating, then they're forced to talk about your issues because, you know, elections are decided by 6 votes. And when that's just one car full, somehow they start talking about your issues a little bit more. So there's a relevance factor that we have to address. And the second is the process factor. It seems really boring, but we're just not born knowing how elections work. We're taught it. We're taught it from our elders. We're taught it in schools. We're taught it from our parents and from our peers. But it's not something you're just born knowing. And actually, the process is somewhat confusing. Some might say intentionally, but it certainly is. It varies in every state, sometimes by county. You have to fill out a piece of paper, sign it, put a bunch of information in, send it in by some arbitrary deadline, get a form back. Where do I go? What do I bring? What's the ballot going to look like? Who's on it? How do I decide? They're big questions, and it's intimidating if you've never been through it, and especially if you don't understand the process and how it works. So we have found that if we simply educate people about not only what's at stake in the issues, but also how it's going to work, it creates a sense of confidence, and people are much more likely to show up and vote. So with those two things in mind, the kind of, you know, the backbone, the process stuff, and then the motivation on top of it, we run a number of programs that I'll just walk through a couple. The first is what we call democracy class. It's very descriptive. It's a class about democracy, right? It is about what it means and how it works, not just how to navigate it, but why it's important. And it is a program that we run in high schools all around the country. And we run that on in the spring of every year. So it launches each year on March 23rd, and it goes for 100 days. Does anyone have any idea why March 23rd? We'll have to teach a democracy class. So on March 23rd, the 26th Amendment, which gave 18, 19, and 20-year-olds the right to vote, was introduced by Congress to the country for ratification. It was ratified as the fastest constitutional amendment ever in our country in less than 100 days. So from March 23rd till July 1st, we call on teachers in high schools across America to join us in educating 16, 17, 18-year-olds who are just about to, be eligible to use this right about what it means and the power behind it and how to navigate this process. Right now, civic education has been cut nationwide, so we have to do something about it. And it is my belief that if just one day, really, it shouldn't be that hard, one day, once a year, in every high school in America, we took just 45 minutes and taught our young people about the process, the importance and the power, and how to navigate the elections, we would have a very, very different democracy. So we created this program. It's got a really cool video that's animated with a bunch of musicians telling you the history of voting, and then a lesson plan and some buttons and T-shirts and materials and a whole bunch of twists and turns that are really fun and hopefully help people understand and experience what it means and how to actually participate, a mock election, and then some contests for all those students. We are in about 3,000 schools right now, starting this March, and hopefully we'll be working with all of you to bring it to schools in your own communities. To make it a special day or a memorable day, we also try to do things for the whole school, not just the senior class. So we'll invite local artists and athletes and radio stations and DJs to come in and play music and do a rally for the school, be a guest teacher. So we have NFL athletes around the country available to go into classrooms. We have about 150 artists who are working with us to be guest teachers this spring and hopefully inspire and engage young people to get involved. So that's kind of the high school, the new voters. These will be the first-time voters in November. The second thing we do is think about where people are. And we go ask them to get registered, right? So again, now we've kind of educated them on the process a little bit. Now we have to ask them to register. So we do that through online programs. We actually have an online voter registration tool that someone can just fill it out, and it makes the form really simple to fill out, and then it produces a PDF for them that they can print, sign, and send in. It tells them where to send it and all the election dates and everything they'll need to know. That tool is something that we use for our programs, but it's also available for free for anyone who wants to put it on their own website and design it and work with it, so you can register your own communities to vote. We go where they are by going to radio stations. We have a Radio Rocks the Vote program. And we provide content for DJs who can talk about the importance of voting and remind people of deadlines to register when they're coming up. And even drive them to their own website where they've got an online registration tool on that radio station's website. We go where they are on the ground. So and people want to volunteer, we say great. We give them a quick training and set them free. We send them T-shirts and clipboards and materials, train them, and then connect them with music venues, concerts, and festivals happening in their communities. And we have a national team that's working to identify those and connect people up so we can be doing registration, whether it's on college campuses or in communities. And then in addition to going where they are, we kind of bring people together. So this happens in the fall when it's kind of the last couple weeks to get registered. There's deadlines coming up, and we organize concerts as well as bus tours where we bring people together and talk about the importance of voting and get them all registered to vote. And that's kind of the registration components. Through that, we'll actually run the largest voter registration campaign by a nonpartisan group in the country this year. We expect to register about 1.5 million people through our programs. They take place in every state around the country except North Dakota. Does anyone know why? No registration there, yeah. And so, and we'll bring them all together. Once they're in our programs, of course, it's easy. Well, it's not easy. It takes a lot of work. But once they're in the programs, then we can turn them out and we can educate them. And that's where the last kind of two things, which really mirror the work that you're doing, the educate and ask. So to educate, we have Election Land, which is an online resource where people can find everything they need to know. We also run PSAs with celebrities to grab people's attention and make sure they understand what's at stake and where to get information. We send emails, we send text messages, we make live phone calls, and at the end of the day make sure that 100% of those that we've registered get spoken to. And at the end of it, we kind of overlay all of that with all the artists and musicians who've been involved for the past 20 years, and we try to make sure that there's this sense, whether it's through that cultural context, but also through all the organizations that we work with and all the young people that we work with. We try to use the media to highlight their efforts and try to make this sense that there's a movement happening and really convey that using the kind of national microphone that we have. So at the end of the day, instead of feeling like this is something that is, no one else is doing, right? Only 1 in 3 turned out. It's not relevant to me and doesn't matter. We flip that on its head and say, no, millions of people have registered to vote for the first time. Hundreds of people have been coming together at these events and festivals around the country. Look what's happening with the Native Vote program in these set of locations. And oh my gosh, look what's happening with, all these other partners that we're working with. And at the end, look at the TV commercials and your email and the mobile, and oh my gosh, it's everywhere you look, and there's this sense that everyone's doing it. And hopefully through that we can motivate millions more people to continue participation and really build their political power in this process. So that's the kind of 40,000-foot view of some of the programs we do and why we do it. And I think I'll stop there because my intention really is then to figure out how we can do that with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather.
Yeah, of course.
I wonder if folks have any questions. There's a couple of kind of kick-off discussion questions there on your agenda, but let's start with any questions you might have for Heather about ways that your tribe or community could partner with Rock the Vote. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
How big of a voting group are you looking for? I mean, we're from a pretty small community, rural area. Mm-hmm. Are you going to work with the small communities as well as the larger ones for the target areas like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We tend to go where the demand is. So if because we're small, we have a big brand, right? And but our model is a partnership one where we leverage media, and we've got partnerships with MTV and other major news outlets. We have partners with artists and athletes who are speaking about it and can reach millions of people with a message. But when it comes to engaging folks on the ground, then we partner with organizations that are there in that community. And so if there's interest somewhere, that's where we spend our time. Obviously, there's some places where we've been for a long time, and we try to continue building up those communities and those places. But at Rock the Vote, when we were looking at our 2012 plans, because we're national in scope, we were looking at young people overall. And we were looking for places where there was underrepresentation. And in the Native community was one of those places. They're not registering and voting at the same rates as other young people, and we want to help support that. And so while there's only 8 of us on our campaign, on our whole organizations team, there are, thousands of teachers and tens of thousands of volunteers. But of those 8 people, one person who we just hired will be focused exclusively on supporting this community. And so it's a real investment on our part. It's something we're taking seriously. And if you if you want to help and if you want to get involved and if you're running a program, then we'll provide materials and support and conversation to do that. And a vote, one more person registered is actually a really big deal. In any way we can help do that.
And I'd say, just to add to that, from our kind of Native Vote partnership perspective, there's a lot of national partners, particularly those, and most folks working on these issues are working with skeleton teams of staff and working with partnerships. And there's a sense in which smaller rural communities, states like Montana and Idaho and others, are states where you're not talking about needing to register 500,000 voters like you would in California to make a difference. Like Robert said, 6 voters can actually change a state election outcome. They can change a Senate election outcome in a lot of smaller states. So there's kind of bang for the buck, very significant impact in a lot of Native vote-focused states as well.
Yeah, we had we kicked off this election season with a Rock the Caucus event. So we figured the first contest was the Iowa caucuses. We're going to be there. We're going to show the candidates and campaigns and the media that Rock the Vote's in the middle of this and young people really matter. So we did this high school program. We provided free mock caucus materials. Be careful when I slip up on those words. To high schools across the state, and then in this big high school in West Des Moines, the Secretary of State, the chief elections official, and myself went in to run that mock caucus with the students. It was a really fun event. We were really excited. There's about 820 eligible juniors and seniors in the school, and they were all there in this big assembly. At the last minute, we decided to invite all the presidential candidates, thinking, if we could introduce them, they'd be forced to speak to young people, and maybe politics would feel relevant through that process, and we could provide this forum. And of course, on January 1, which is about 2 days prior, they all say yes. So, needless to say, I spent my New Year's in West Des Moines, Iowa, which is really exciting. And I got to know everyone from the fire chief, because we had to clear out all the lanes for all these buses that were driving in, and the police chief because of the security. And sure enough, that morning I got to the high school at about 5:15 in the morning, and we were doing going to Morning Joe that morning. I was bringing a bunch of the students down to watch the morning broadcast, and then we were going to go do our big event. And we showed up at the school, and there was over like 30 trucks already lined up. And by the time we got back, there was over 300 media outlets there standing outside of the high school. And then all the big campaign buses, I think like thousands of, what felt like thousands, probably wasn't, Ron Paul supporters who'd come in from across the state, Michelle Bachmann, Senator Santorum, Ron Paul, the Romney boys stopped by. They all brought their families, and they gave their stump speeches. And it was really interesting that instead of speaking to these students and motivating them on caucus day that night, they could go caucus for the first times and saying, vote for me and here's why, and speaking directly to the students. Instead, as they were live streamed on CNN and MSNBC and everything else, they spoke to the political audience, not to the students in the room. And later that night, when the caucus results were getting tallied, and the decision was only by 8 votes, right? And I know it changed, and I don't even know what the final tally was, but it was, it counted on 2 hands. It made me feel like, well, we went back to all the campaigns and we said, listen, this is what you had 820 students in that room on caucus day. And we went back to the students and we said, if any of you showed up to vote that day, you most likely made a difference in the outcome. So kind of knowing that in these places, decisions can be made by a small number of people. For those students, they really got to understand the power of their own vote and that they can make a difference. And hopefully we started the candidates and campaigns on realizing that not addressing young voters at a moment like that could make or break the outcome of the election. So, small and rural doesn't really matter to us. Every vote kind of matters in this context.
Great, thank you. We had a question here, sir.
We've got 4 fully devoted folks with our tribe, and we have 400 and 500 kids from kindergarten to 12th grade. We actually started a fundraiser, like a contest for the kids.
Yeah.
We've identified about 25,000 unregistered voters in our congressional district. And what we're trying to do is, we know that demographic is from 18 to wherever.
Yeah.
So we know that's a wide demographic, but we're using the kids to get their parents to register through iPods and iPads.
Yeah.
You bring back 5 voter registrations to your unit manager to keep a tally. At the end of 2 months, we're going to award an iPad or an iPod to the kid who brought back the most voter registrations. Just as one time in the process, but then also show the parents that politics is reaching beyond just these, and they need to be involved because their kids are going to be involved. They need to be involved.
That's great.
Can you tell us which tribe you're from, sir?
Lumbee.
Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. Great. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
It's a great idea.
I just had a quick process question for a community that's interested in bringing, Rockford Vote into their community. What kind of investment is required? Does the leadership of that community have to put in time and resources, or if there's just a couple of youth who want to bring it in, is that going to be significant enough to actually get it off the ground?
Yeah, if there's some young people who want to get involved, bring it on. Well, yeah, it'll start there and it'll grow. So we'll provide them with a street team toolkit, which is a handbook on how to run a voter registration drive in your community that they'll probably need to work with others in their, in the organization or in the leadership to figure out, okay, how does this apply, and, brainstorm some ideas. But we equip them with their own stuff and what they need to know, and let them get out there and start talking to their peers about voting. That kind of peer-to-peer communication really does start this context that voting is cool and it's part of my identity and it's something I'm proud of. We talk a lot about organizing networks as opposed to neighborhoods, and the power of one person communicating to their network. about voting really does go a really long way. Also, if, you know, there's easy things they can do. If one or two people, we can always know, like if one of our, let's say, concert tours are going through that area, then we know who to call and say, hey, do you want to come set up a table? So maybe they're not organizing their own events, but they're available when we have stuff coming through.
And I'd say also the student, you know, the impact of young people on turnout in Indian country, I think, is something we're really trying to get our arms wrapped around. There's this really interesting study that UCLA does of graduating seniors about their intentions of political participation and how involved they are. And Native people come out almost at the top of that group. And so we know that Native students, folks like the Youth Commission folks in the room right now, are people who are highly engaged and also have an influence at home. As we work with some of the tribal colleges, there's a real sense in which we're talking to one Native young person with the sense that aunties and uncles and grandmas and grandpas and mom and dad and brothers and sisters can be engaged through engaging that person. So there's a real significant impact there. I had a comment up the front, and then I'm going to go to the back.
Our nation, our bigger band is made up of half people who are not eligible. We have a lot of kids to reach out to. And that's a large base to cover.
Yeah, we focus on 18 to 29-year-olds, which is about 50 million people. So obviously within that, and that's our broadcast message, right? So that's when we're putting stuff out on, you know, online videos and on television, and it's just geared towards that age group. The targeted work where we do start investing money is really focused on the first-time voter. So that 18, 19, 20-year-old, whether they're the high school program or setting up chapters in college campuses. Making sure materials are really geared towards that process of navigating it for the first time. But, you know, it can be applied to anything. I think these pledge cards are amazing, and if you're out talking to people and sharing information about elections and having them sign those cards, well, when they do turn 18, you can mail them a voter registration form.
Do you have any type of platforms for younger individuals? When it comes down to me, it's small inside, like every single it's really hard to figure out sometimes, especially for traffic lights.
Yeah, that's why it depends on the community, but what I call bringing people together, it sometimes just makes it unique. It makes it okay to show up. So when we have the radio station show up and just DJ, at the high school, all of a sudden everyone's like, whoa, this is cool, what's going on? It's like, oh, it's about voting. And it actually makes a pretty big difference. And, on the flip side, sometimes it's not the easiest work in the world. And it takes conversations. There's been decades and decades and decades of people saying, young people are apathetic. Your vote doesn't matter. This isn't about you. And we're doing that work of reversing it, but there's not a silver bullet either. I work in the music industry a lot, or with them a lot, and they're always like, this is just crazy. If you're trying to sell someone a product, you don't say, this product's disgusting, but you should buy it, right? You don't say, oh, voting, no one's doing it, but why don't you show up? You have to actually make it appealing, and you have to explain why it matters, and you have to explain why they should want it, and you have to explain that lots of people are doing it too. And so, there's a craft in it, and that's why actually our partnership model is based on empowering young people and community leaders to do this work, because you know your own community best and can probably figure out ways to do that. But we'll help make it seem cool with a bunch of buttons and maybe some musicians and give you a leg up, right?
Great. The other thing, before we go to the next question, that we're doing is working on developing a youth curriculum for Native communities in particular. The Boys and Girls Club that was mentioned in a previous comment, that infrastructure is more than 200 clubs strong throughout Indian country, and there are a lot of other youth program activities that can really help engage communities. And we know that those kinds of youth-focused efforts can be really impactful, so we're really working on that. The other thing I'd say, and I mentioned it earlier this morning, President Kiel was very articulate. He's very articulate, period, and I don't just say that because I work for NCAI. But President Kiel was very articulate on issues related to Native Vote in the State of Indian Nations address. It's right there on the homepage of NCAI's website, and if you want to go there and check out that video, he has some very powerful stories and some really good kind of video clips that we're working on putting into PSAs and other things you can use on radio stations in your communities. To be able to actually have that voice from leadership in Indian country to kind of make this is cool, this is important, this is expected, this is impactful, those kinds of messages that aren't just this is disgusting. From a country, I come from a country where it's compulsory to vote, so it's just you have to. That's the message. But go ahead, sir.
Buster Adberry, here representing the Group Tribe of California.
Great.
And my question is, we have issues locally, and so there's some tedious issues with the Board of Supervisors, Assistant County supervisors regarding dam removal, the river, the water quality, fish habitat. So there's been quite a few years of not working together and collaboratively. So is it the same procedure to motivate our members and community members to register locally and become involved there? Because these are issues that affect them directly, affect our members directly.
Yeah.
So, the other question, I had one more question, is we're sending a tribal member 3 years ago, and she won what's called the Gates Millennium Scholarship Award.
Yeah.
At the school. She's attending University of California, Berkeley. And we're sending her to Washington, D.C. this summer as a congressional intern.
Wonderful.
So we would also like to use her accomplishments as a way to maybe motivate some of the younger students to register and be involved.
Yeah.
So I'd maybe like to get some information on how we could use that for our benefit.
We would love to do that. Just to that last comment first, and then we'll go to another question here too. We would love to. There's really great functionality on the Native Vote website for folks to post their own stories and information, and the kind of story you're telling about a Gates Millennium Scholar from your community who'll be here in Washington, D.C., seeing how the political process works, seeing how Native people can influence it, and seeing how much more work we have to do. I think that's the kind of story we'd love to have on the Native Vote website, so we'd love to visit with you more about that. Robert's story that he told at the outset about taking the Native Vote and putting it in front of an elected official and saying, do you understand how important engaged Native voters are to your electorate, can really make a difference. And I'll let other folks who are more expert in registration processes talk about it. But the answer is absolutely the local level engagement and the kind of registration efforts that we're partnering on at the national level with a certain national focus are also about building a foundation at the local level as well for voters.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would actually, this young woman sounds amazing, and maybe would go in and be the guest teacher of the democracy class program that we're working on that's tailored more to your communities. And really holding her up to something, it makes it feel very possible to other young people when they see that. And a bit of a superstar, too, it sounds like she is. And when she's in D.C., make sure she looks me up, so I'll give you my information.
I will.
But on the local stuff, I think this is so powerful. And yes, of course, you fill out the form and you send it into your local office and they can get registered. But through this high school program, I've been traveling the country for about a year and a half now, leading these sessions in high schools and predominantly in lower income communities. And at one point in the lesson, we stop and say, okay, all these things get decided, but what do you care about? What are your daily concerns? What concerns do you have? And it's like the whole room changes, because for what seems like perhaps the first time, or maybe just because it is meaningful to be asked, these young people, these students feel like someone just asked me what I care about and what's important to me, and the conversation changes. And this one quick story about, I was in a high school in Arleta in California, so not too far from you, and I asked the students what they cared about, and the issues were trash, and then usually get something about, some other community-related stuff. And I said, okay, trash. Well, who decides things like trash pickup? Oh, well, the city. Okay. Well, where else is there trash problems? And you just saw these light bulbs go off, like, oh, it's picked up 3 times a week, 2 towns over in Beverly Hills, but here it only comes once every 3 weeks, and then there's this huge trash problem. And how do those decisions get made by these people that we elect, and why is that unfair? And then, but we as voters have the power to actually influence that. We also talk about how they know who votes and doesn't. And so when they're making decisions, are they making decisions to support those who are voting or those who are not? And these are very local. You can see the impacts and the effect. And these light bulbs just went off. And I promise you, every one of those students was pretty fired up by the time they left. They're all going to get registered. I promise they're all going to vote, in the city level because of issues like this now that they understood it. And it's just really powerful to see. So I think when something is that close and you can actually see and understand the real impact, it's a much easier play than saying my vote in the middle of this big national country is going to make a big difference on, stuff like college affordability and the other national issues.
Chairman Hayes.
Good morning, Gary Hayes, Chairman of the Mount Tribe. I noticed that you're targeting 2 specific from the 18 to 29 you were saying, and also the high school. Mm-hmm. One of the ways that we can possibly encourage our native youth to get involved at an early age, we know the history of America, but in our schools, they're not taught at that level also in high school. Yeah. Maybe there's got to be a point where we can get them engaged by asking, a certain question that triggers off something, saying, hey, they do care about me, because in the history books, there's nothing really, they skip over the dark chapter, but we have a relationship, and I like the questions that are in the handout here about the Constitution pertaining to in tribal government. That should trigger off some type of encouragement. Hey, maybe I can make a difference. Because I think, the mindset, as we know, that many of our their parents or grandparents don't feel that we're engaged or we're not heard because of look at what's going on in our community. Yeah. The lack of, when you talk about trust, responsibility with the federal government, that needs to be engaged at the mindset with them to understand that they need to be mindful of that, because they are going to be our future. And as a tribal leader, that's what I'm always concerned about, is what this generation is thinking. When we talk about unity, when we talk about creating this youth commission, the purpose is to unite them. And how it unites them is looking at the issues that face us, not only national level, but at our local levels also. When you talk about county, when you talk about state representation, that has to be a focus, because I don't really want to see a U.S. Senator. The last Native American Senator was from Colorado, Denai Horse Campbell. We need to get somebody else in there. And I think those are the incentives in thinking how we can make change the policies and the regulations that will affect us in generations to come. And I think when you put that in there, and that can continue on to universities, that can continue on in a general question that are given to the candidates, because you never hear about IHS when they talk about government health care program. If you don't fund it properly, this is what's going to happen. And if you want a program like that, then fund it 100%. And you can see those are just, and it goes to health, it goes to housing, it goes to all these programs that any country has experienced for decades. And I think by engaging the youth in those types of discussions or opening that curiosity, saying, hey, maybe I can make a difference. I think that's the way you would be able to get more involvement in it. And the second thing is also is you look at, as you're saying, the bands and the groups, look at a Native American band. Get that engaged. Get them that, hey, even though we're that less, that 2%, we have a special unique responsibility that the federal government does to the tribe. And I think that needs to be put, I would say, into the limelight to engage that type of discussion.
Yeah.
So appreciate the opportunity, and thank you very much for being here.
Yeah.
And thank NCAI for putting this on. I think it's great. I'm glad to see a lot of youth here. Get this moving forward. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you,
thank you
sir.
very much. And just one quick comment. We're working together on, so we have this high school curriculum that's about the history of voting, and we're working on an addendum together that will also explain the role of Native tradition and culture in forming everything from the Constitution of this country and beyond, so that when it's taught in these schools, there's a real sense of ownership of the entire country and this government, and seeing if we can help instill that and teach that. So look forward to your feedback on it for sure, and thank you.
Question back here, sir.
Good morning. My name is Arlen Melendez. I'm chairman Reno Spartans Washoe Pioneer Tribe in Nevada. And one of the things I've seen as far as participation of the youth, you get youth when they're talking about issues, issues like taxation and all these different sovereign rights of tribes. Sometimes there's not really the connection, but where I see there is a connection is in the cultural issues. We see on our reservation many of our youth become involved in things like monitoring sacred sites, and all those different things to the land itself. And so if we were going to start somewhere to try to get a connection as to what interests youth in getting involved, what I see is the culture and those type issues to really draw them in. Then you can kind of springboard to some of the other issues like taxation. And then not only that, with a lot of the desecration of land by mining and all those different things, some of the decisions really have to do with judges who make those decisions, not really a political congressman or something like this. So because judges are appointed by somebody, you have to kind of go up the chain and figure out, how do I change these judges, since they're not really, many times running for office, they get appointed to a lifetime judgeship. So you really have to kind of determine who stands for protecting the native culture. And I just want to make the point that I think there's a good opportunity to involve youth with the culture and those type of things, as opposed to, I chair the taxation for NCAI on our subcommittee, but it's hard to draw them into those type of maybe more distant discussions, but I think the culture can kind of lead them into those, broadening it out to those other issues. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments? Good. Just wait for a microphone. Thanks.
My name is Ashley. I'm from the Native American Political Leadership Program at George Washington. I think that there may be some untapped potential in reaching out to urban communities. I'm from Chicago, and I know there's a big community center there. I went to DePaul University, and we had an intertribal student org and a coalition with Northwestern Native students and UIC Native students and UFC Native students. So I think perhaps reaching out to urban communities and utilizing urban networks of Natives may also be some untapped potential.
Thank you.
Are you in Chicago?
I live here now, but I'm from Chicago.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Great. We do a lot of work in Chicago, predominantly around, say, Lollapalooza, which then launches a whole campaign for the fall. So maybe we can figure out how to do that together.
Great. Thank you. Sir.
Just real quick, I don't want to take up all your time here.
No,
Again,
this
I'm
is
Gary
great.
Ray from the Kruger tribe. Just to kind of reiterate on what Gary was saying about the youth and getting them involved. We have, up in Happy Camp, we only have probably between 75 and 80 kids in the school, and I was a school teacher before I became the tribal chairman, and I seen that they were very, very interested, but they knew very little, the tribal members, and so we need to get the information out to them. We started a language class, which we've never had, and it's not an accredited class, so we teach it Wednesdays mornings from 9 to 10, so they only get 1 hour a week. Out of the 75 students that were there, we had, and we're probably 50% Native American, we had 22 students show up
to take the class, and it dwindled a little bit. The class is treated like an elective where you need to have a certain grade point average. You need to be caught up on your homework, otherwise you won't be able to attend the class.
Mm-hmm.
But we're just the number that turned out, it was fantastic, and it just kind of showed me that they are interested. They just need a lot more information.
That's great. Thank you, sir. Sir, just wait 1 sec for the microphone for video audio.
I read an article recently that the 18 to 34-year-old demographic is one of the most connected demographics of individuals right now, especially with social media and whatnot. So I'm curious, what are you guys doing to work with social media to just get information and educate folks?
Great. So we have a Native Vote. The Native Vote website is actually built off of a social media platform that includes linkages to the Native Vote Facebook group and the Native Vote Twitter account. And I can certainly get you more information. You may be able to tell I'm looking like a deer in headlights right now. I allegedly have a Twitter account, and I'm not on Facebook. So there are people on our team who have better information than me. But we have engaged those tools, and it's something that we're definitely thinking about. And we're talking to some national campaigns that are looking at using Facebook as an organizing tool specifically around voting, and that'll be launching on Native Vote in the coming months. So.
Are you guys using anything with, there's a new social media called Pinterest. It's the most rapidly expanding social media site out there. One main thing about it is they use photos instead of words, really, to kind of get information out there. So it might be something you might be interested in looking in.
Cool. Thank you.
And one additional thing for obviously all of you, the online voter registration tool that is available, obviously it can go up on the Native Vote website, but if you want to run your own registration drive with your peers online, you can just go sign up at rockthevote.com/partners and get a piece of code. It can go on your Facebook page, on your website, on your blog, on your university site, wherever you might want it to be. And you can then start running online registration campaigns, tracking how many people fill it out, where they come from. And then in about, we'll say 2 months to be safe, there'll be a bunch of other components around that. And you can brand it, put your own logo in, and make it look like your own, so it feels like your own tool. But coming in the summer for sure, but if not sooner, there'll be a bunch of kind of online organizing components attached to that. So when you register a certain number of people, you might unlock some content, some music, some free materials, Spotify, subscriptions, that type of stuff to get people started, and kind of, run that through Facebook and other online platforms. So hopefully encourage people to run what you would do, a peer-to-peer online voter registration drive, the same way you would on the ground in a community.
Great. Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and then we're going to transition to the next part of the agenda too, and we'll have more time for discussion, I'm sure. Any other questions folks want to ask? Okay. I am going to go ahead and turn the time over to Peggy Flanagan. And Peggy's going to share some cool stuff.
Okay. Cool stuff. Cool stuff. Bonjour, my name is Peggy Flanagan. Guabaga Niganikagnan Dunjaba, Mangan and Dodame. I'm a member of the White Earth Band of Ojibwe in Minnesota, and my family's the Wolf Clan. The role of the Wolf Clan and my family is to be the protectors of the community and to make sure that we always are looking behind us to ensure that we haven't left anybody behind. And so that's why I do this work. I think that voter engagement, if I could wave a magic wand and have my wish, it would be that as part of our identity, and what the gentleman from California was talking about is that being voters and being civically engaged becomes part of our identity as Indian people. Working closely with Native Vote and NCAI are trying to figure out what are the best steps in making that happen. We're going to talk a little bit about nonpartisan voter mobilization. 501c3 organizations, or NCAI, does a lot of nonpartisan voter mobilization. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means. What that actually looks like in your communities and what folks do on the ground may be a little different, but where the components of putting together a plan and how this actually works are the same. I'm often, I usually, and Cietta knows this from being on the road, I usually stand when I talk and I walk around, so I'm like, I feel like I'm stuck. So if I look like, you know, I'm ready to take off, that's why. So I'm gonna try this out. So there's no limit on the activity of political, you know, doing politics as individuals. An individual has a right to be involved, to educate on the issues and engage others in the political process. And as we were talking, you know, earlier and talking about Rock the Vote, which is so exciting, is that you all are the best messengers for this voter engagement piece. So often what happens is that we see candidates or campaigns sort of parachute into our communities, suck out all the resources, and leave the day after the election. And I like to call that electoral strip mining, right? And it feels as though candidates come around, you know, the Sunday before election day, or come around the summer before the election, you know, dance awkwardly at a powwow, and then, you know, we never see them again, right? And so, except 2 years, 4 years, or 6 years later, when suddenly we become the most important thing that they want to talk about, and then they forget about us. And so, I think the goal of having individuals and folks in communities do this work and feel empowered to do this work, and to have Native Vote always be something that we're thinking about and being constant program, is that we're building that infrastructure in our communities ourselves. And we can say that these are the issues that are important to us as a community. And so if there's campaigns or candidates that come in that we're already, you know, we know what's up, and we're sharing what works best in our own communities, and can rely on our own folks to go out in the community and talk to people either on the door or community events, and we're constantly building. And so in off-election years, right, you know, we will hear this, right, that 2012 is the most important election of our time, right? And you'll hear that again, and you're going to keep hearing that every election cycle. But the reality is that every year we're building, and we should be building on something, and that we always should be trying to get new people engaged and involved in the process. I think one of the advantages that we have as Native people is that we're always looking forward. You know, remembering where we come from, but also always looking forward to the next generation and making sure that we're building on something as we move forward. And so, you know, to think about this voter engagement work in that way too. Certainly we want to register folks and turn them out for the election, but it's not just about what happens in 2012, it's what happens as we move into the future. So again, we have you know, the opportunity to organize politically and not be partisan. You know, to make sure that the voice of the people that we serve are heard, and that the folks who are directly affected by an issue should have the largest voice and the greatest voice in impacting policy. You know, I like that there's so many young people in the room. There's so many folks here. I also am part of the Native American Political Leadership Program at George Washington University. And we've got students here who then intern in congressional offices, are kind of learning the ropes here in Washington, D.C., so that they can go back home and teach folks about why it's important for just Native folks to be seen in the halls of Congress and in the halls of power, and to be here. You know, I can't tell you how often I have students who, you know, start in new offices, and there's people who they work with who are like, I didn't even know Native Americans existed anymore, right? Or ask just, you know, like, do you live in a teepee? Do you still ride horses? And it's like, do you live in a teepee? Right? So, so just thinking about, like, it's also just having a presence here is also an opportunity to just educate people that we're still here. We're a modern people. We're grounded in culture and tradition, but that we exist and that our issues are important and should be taken seriously. So, actually just going to go through this. So, one of the reasons why we do voter registration is so that we can build our base of folks who are engaged and involved in this work. Oftentimes what we hear from, maybe from partisan campaigns is, well, we're just going to talk to registered voters. We're not going to bother talking to anybody who's not registered because that's a demographic that we know. It's, and Heather's nodding her head because this is something that I'm sure, she hears often too. And that's fine if we want to keep electing the same people. But the last time I checked, there's one Native person in Congress. One. That's a problem, right? And so if we want to elect more folks from our own communities and who share and reflect our values, that means the demographics of the electorate have to change, and we have to elect our, register our own folks so that they're turning out. So there's steps in voter mobilization. We're going to talk a little bit about each step. The first being voter registration. The second is voter education. We're going to talk a little bit about candidate education. I'm sure there are some candidates that you would like to educate, right, on the issues that are most important to you. Election protection, making sure that we can vote and we can vote confidently and safely and ensure that our rights are protected. And then finally, get out the vote, or GOTV. So like I said earlier, right, voter registration expands the electorate, and I would argue changes the electorate. I want people to think about Native Americans when they're making decisions, when they're governing, and that they're governing in partnership with us. I come from Minnesota, where our Senator Al Franken, who sits on the Indian Affairs Committee, was elected by 312 votes. I like to remind the senator that those 312 people were all Indians. Thank you very much. And that, that we have the power within our communities to sway the vote, right? And how we decide to turn out. And it's worth that investment for candidates to be there. But so through voter registration, this is the first conversation oftentimes that we have with folks about politics. And it isn't going out there and saying, so, excuse me, what are some of the political issues that you care about? Is that a fun conversation? For some of us, it might be, right? You're in D.C., let your nerd flag fly, right, a little bit. But for most of us, right, saying like, so what are some of the things in the community that you'd like to see changed? What are some of the things here that you're most proud of? What do you think we do really well as a community? Those are the places where we can start those conversations with folks about getting registered and about being engaged and involved in the process. And oftentimes, I show this picture of a booth, but people are standing up. Too often what ends up happening is that when we do voter registration drives or we set up at powwows, people sit behind the table, very similar to what you see here, and people put like buttons and candy out on the front of the table. And then folks will come by, grab candy off the table, try not to make eye contact with you so they don't have to have a conversation and then keep going. Versus getting our folks out, and especially young people, out from behind that table with clipboards, having conversations with people about what they really care about and getting people registered. It takes a little bit more time. It takes a little bit more effort. But those conversations are the ones that really make the difference for folks to feel connected to voting and like it's part of their identity. It creates the opportunity to talk about issues. So maybe, if I approach someone and I say, do you want to talk about taxation? That might not be at the top of their list, but we can start talking about our cultural identity. And as a way, right, talking about taxation, talking about sovereignty, and starting to lift up through building that relationship and that trust, the issues that impact us the most. And then helps our organizers who are out there going door to door about what people's concerns are in the community. I worked with a group of young people out at Cheyenne River. And one of the things that we were doing is we were recording little PSAs, little announcements about what they thought were some of the most pressing issues in their community. And the thing that they identified, that these young people identified as being most important, was animals and animal cruelty. And that seeing animals get hurt in the community was something that was really impacting them. And so a lot of the youth workers who were part of this youth center where we were like, we had no idea until we intentionally created this space for them to start to talk about what most affected them. So even just creating that space where folks can just start to share what's most important to them and to their communities and what really drives them to want to do this work is really important.
Hey, Peggy, real quick. I've been sent messages by the folks with the Youth Commission next door that if there are Youth Commission members who are planning to attend the advocacy training that they're having next door, then you should slip out when you can. Okay?
Good,
Sorry.
so I won't take it personally if a bunch of people leave. And they're like,
Yeah, it's not about you.
Fail. So this voter registration work should be part of the work that we do all the time, not just during, heated election years, but should be like, folks were saying earlier, the smaller the office, oftentimes the more directly it affects your life. I am living proof of that. I am a retired elected official. I served on the Minneapolis School Board. In 2004, I was elected and became the first Native American and the youngest person to serve in that office. And we did that by going out and knocking on doors and having conversations with people in community. What I heard for a long time from sort of the folks who'd been there for a while, sort of engaged and involved in the political process was, oh, don't bother going to those particular neighborhoods, right, because those people don't vote. Go to the areas where, people are registered and turn out on a regular basis. And I was like, those people? I am those people, right? And so we knocked in the neighborhoods where, the majority of the people in the district live, right? The majority of the people who have kids in school, that's where they live. And we're able to pass a memorandum of agreement between the Native American community and the school district, which has just been renewed 5 years later. And that only happened because we were able to mobilize. I think it had a little to do with me and more to do with just the Native folks were showing up because there was someone on the ballot who was from the community. And so that's just another sort of thing to think about. Who are the folks in your community who could step up and run that also encourages folks to turn out? So voter registration, we have to know the rules, and that's why Native Vote and Rock the Vote are also really good resources because there's spaces on the website that outlines kind of what are the requirements. Is there same-day voter registration in your state? What are the deadlines? What do you need to be able to register? And so just knowing those rules is really important so that we can make sure that once we register folks, it's legal, they're viable, et cetera. These are just, we've got some folks from Mille Lacs in here, which is exciting because I think they are the poster children for how this works and how this works well. So these are from Native Vote Alliance of Minnesota, a nonpartisan 501c3 group of all 11 nations in Minnesota. These are some of the tools that we put together around voter registration and messaging. So the first one was 80 years ago they couldn't, today you can, really calling on the fact that many of our ancestors weren't recognized as citizens and didn't have the right to vote. And so as a way to sort of honor our roots and where we've come from, that voting was an important piece of that. Also, we vote to honor our children, our future. We can talk about a lot of issues sort of under that overall message. We can talk about education. We can talk about safety, access to boys and girls clubs, sports opportunities in our communities, language revitalization, but that we know our communities best. And to really think about, what is going to speak to folks and get them motivated to turn out and to vote. And we found that these two messages, and again, Native branding, both of these posters were done by a Native artist, Steve Primo, and just found that things that come sort of directly from the community are what's most powerful. So voter education, like the what are we sharing with people? And the first piece is on the right to vote. In some communities, like Heather said, it can be really, the process itself can be intimidating. One of the things that I did when I worked at an organization called the Division of Indian Work was to bring in a polling station, like literally like those, how it's set up, what the ballot's going to look like, and worked with my families, and we filled out the ballots and said, okay, this is what you should expect. This is how the process works. So once we loaded up that 12-passenger van, right, with moms and kids and Cheerios and juice boxes, right, that everybody knew what was expected. And nobody felt intimidated when they went in there because they'd already been through this. So again, like our job as organizers, and I think all of us in this room in some way, shape, or form are organizers, is to make it as easy as possible for people to vote, and to ensure that folks have the rights, the information that they need. So sometimes that means just like a little 3x5 card saying know your rights, and talking about, in states that your tribal ID is in fact a valid form of identification, and to make sure that people just really feel empowered, and if they run into any trouble, that we've got phone numbers that they can call, and people who are ready to go, who will be able to support them with anything that they need. How to vote, how government works, or sometimes how government doesn't work, right? But really to educate people on what is actually on the ballot. In some years, in large election years, almost every office is up for a vote, and that can be really intimidating in and of itself. Like county commissions, for example, wield incredible amounts of power, and also, especially for Native folks, our families are really impacted by the systems in county government. Nobody knows what it is that they actually do. Right? And so part of our job, too, is to say, this is what this particular office does, right? I think when I was on the school board, people are like, is that like student council? Kind of, right? Yes. And, right, we hire and fire the superintendent and have a, $636 million budget. So, and we don't get to put on school dances, right? But like it's similar. So thinking about how do you start to frame, what these offices are actually about, and like what Heather was talking about too. When does my garbage get picked up? Does my garbage get picked up? Is there a recycling program here in our community? If not, is that something that we want to talk to the candidates about? Who is actually running? We Native Vote is a non-partisan program and campaign, but we certainly can say here are the candidates, right? We can do candidate surveys, which I'll talk about in a second, where we can get candidate stances and positions on issues that affect our community and can share that information. And then finally, on what are some of the most pressing issues. In Indian country, right, we know that there are several ways that we are affected by the government, and I would argue more so than any other population, right, in the country. We are political bodies, political entities, and so, we need to know how we're being affected, and using real-life examples, talking about those sacred sites, talking about having access to language or teachers who look like us or who know our history, and frankly presenting truthful curriculum in our schools. All of these issues are really important and can be one of the, sort of the bedrock or the foundation for getting people registered and getting them turned out to vote. Here's an example of what we did in 2008 in the Red Lake Nation in Minnesota. So this is a piece of mail. So this is the Red Lake Band of Chippewa Indians, their license plate. We figured if you got a picture of your tribal license plate in the mail, you're probably going to look at it, right? We were trying to figure out what is going to be sort of attention grabbing, and we figured out this was it. So this is the front side of the mail piece. So together we're voting to keep our nation strong. Join us, vote November 4th. And then on the back side, when we vote, we strengthen our tribal sovereignty, we make Indian health service better, we make our schools better and improve opportunities for our kids. And these three pieces that we highlighted here, there was a survey done where our organizers literally went door to door and talked to people about what was most important to them. And from there, we created this lit piece. The second piece of that is, right, when we don't vote, politicians will slash Indian country budgets, politicians will break promises and trust responsibilities, and politicians will ignore our issues. And so while this was, nonpartisan, it also is very political and makes the point about like what the opportunities are for us to engage and to get involved, and what happens when we don't. And then would had a polling location sticker down there at the bottom. So, and then 1-866 our vote if people, which will also be up and running again this year, the day before the election, the day of the election, and the day after the election. If people have questions, concerns, experience any type of voter intimidation, that this will be available to folks. So again, this is specifically done from the Red Lake Nation. You have the opportunity to do something like this in your own community that reflects what your folks are talking about. Okay. So we can do this during voter registration drives, at the door and on the phone, talking to people about what's most important, what they care about, what's at stake. And so often, I think, what we hear, and Heather mentioned this too when it comes to young people, oh, they're so apathetic. Native Americans are apathetic. And I think that's a bunch of baloney. I think that politicians and candidates just aren't talking to us about what's really important and what really matters to us and connects with us on our values. And whenever we go and we are talking to folks in our communities about voting, we should be able to answer the question, why does it matter and why should I care? Right? And you should be able to answer that question for yourself. Too often what happens is we hear, voting's your civic duty and responsibility, right? When it comes to the government, when we talk about duties and responsibilities, that message isn't necessarily very powerful when it comes to to Indian country. I would argue it gets people more fired up than anything else. You want to talk about responsibilities. So what are some of the things, right, that will work? When I go out on doors and I talk to folks, I'm out there because of my mom. And because my mom battles some pretty serious illnesses. And that, at the end of the day, after Social Security, disability, she's got negative $30. Right? And she invested and worked her whole life in the healthcare system. That's not okay with me, right? And I was raised in a community and in a family that taught me that you care for those who cared for you. And so that's why I go out and I knock on doors and I register people to vote and I have conversations about why it's important. And so just ensuring that when we send people out there to do this work, that they're clear on like what's at stake, why it matters to them, to their family, and to our communities as a whole. In public spaces, and I like to say wherever people wait in line. So the post office, right, is a really great place. At Walmart till they kick you out. I don't have any experience with that.
You have
You've never been at Walmart.
Nope. And also, depending on the community, but oftentimes we like to go register folks at IHS because depends, but usually people are waiting around. So there's opportunities to have conversations there too. So just wherever folks gather in your community, it's on. Like you can go and you can have conversations with people and get them registered to vote through voter guides. And oftentimes, what we do in my community is we send out questionnaires to all of the candidates on the issues that are most important to our tribe. And then the candidates who reply with their answers, and then we print that in Anishinaabe Today or in our tribal newspaper, and then bring extra copies of that when we go out and we talk to folks. Like, here's where candidates said they stand on our issues. And when a candidate doesn't reply, that also speaks volumes, right? So just thinking about that as well. In the media, so letters to the editor, opinion and commentary, increasingly for young people, right, thinking about social media and how we can use that as a tool to really bring attention to our issues as well and why it's important for folks to turn out. So candidate education, and I use this photo that is Al Franken, not because I'm from Minnesota, but because this was an opportunity where we invited candidates to the community and, to have conversations with folks about what was most important to them. So you have the right to educate all of the candidates on issues, and all is underlined when we think about doing sort of nonpartisan work, that we're going to extend the invitation to every person who's running for a particular political office. We're going to give them the same time to respond, send the same type of invitation to make sure that it's fair. We can sponsor candidate forums and debates and have those, in our communities and in community centers and a gymnasium, right, in our tribal government buildings to ensure that we're inviting candidates in to speak to our issues. I know at Tulalip, they always have candidate forums with the candidates who are running for sheriff. And that is really powerful because the sheriff in that area makes a lot of decisions and really impacts the lives of the people who live there. And so by inviting all the candidates in, they were able to educate their communities on where these particular candidates stood on their issues, and were able to ask questions of the candidates, which clearly made the case for what the positions of the tribes was on various issues. And then work with all political parties to get your issues included on the platform. So there's resources in your packet for several political parties within each state, so that you can start to elevate the issues that are most important to your community. Again, election protection, so protecting the right to vote through education. Legal advocacy, work with election officials and monitoring the polls. Again, knowing what's happening in your area. In some communities, I know that in Red Lake in 2008, there was some voter intimidation that happened. Red Lake is a closed reservation, so we just escorted those people off the reservation, and that was it. So it was, an opportunity for a lesson in tribal sovereignty for the folks who were doing the intimidation, so just thinking about that too, again, 1-866-OUR-VOTE will be a resource for folks. Oftentimes, Native Vote and NCAI provide Native attorneys who are able to do this work as well, who know specifically what goes down in tribal communities as well. So, that this year we're going to be prepared. We want to certainly prepare for the worst, right, and expect the best when it comes to voter rights and making sure that people have their rights protected. In several states where there's high Native populations, either voter ID has already been passed or will be on the ballot this year. And so making that distinction about what people actually need to bring to the polls this time around, it certainly will be on the ballot in Minnesota. And we know that although people won't need an ID to vote this time around, that because of all the talk that's going on, they will think that they do. So we have to, educate people to ensure that they know and they feel prepared and confident when they go to vote. So what I really want to stress here is that you need to ensure that once you register people to vote, that you're turning them out. We are really, really good in Indian country at registering folks. And then actually getting people to turn out and being able to measure that is the tough part. And so in order to get folks to turn out to vote, people who are who don't often vote, or this is the first time they've registered, or maybe they vote once every 4 years, we have to contact those folks between 5 to 9 times between when we register them and when they actually turn out to the polls. Now, if does that seem like a lot? Be honest, right? It's not like every day I'm like, hey, Heather, it's Peggy again, right? Just making sure you're still going to vote, right? I'm not going to her house every day. That's creepy, right? Okay, don't be creepy. But it's the number one rule of voter mobilization. Don't be creepy. But just be cool.
Easier for some than others.
Exactly, right? So, that we're doing different kinds of contacts. So, we can send out a piece of mail, like I showed earlier. We can call people. So once we have their information, to remind them to turn out and vote, but also to talk about the issues that are most pressing to them. We can have events in the community. So just thinking about the different ways where we can contact people. We also have resources at our website, which I'll show in a moment, which will help you to put together like a voter contact plan and figure out as the election approaches, how are we going to space out when we're contacting people, how we're contacting people to ensure that they turn out. And especially in states where, like I know Washington State and Oregon, where we have high Native populations, have mail-in ballots. Once people have mailed in their ballot, we don't need to talk to them again, right? At least for that election year, and we can focus on the people who still need to turn out. So we think of Get Out the Vote, right, or Get Out the Native Vote. This is the culmination of all of the work that we've done. So if we're going to register people, we have to make sure that they're actually turning out and that we're recording that information. So, how are we going to get them there? phones, calling people, going door to door, and in some of our communities, we're fairly spread out and fairly far to travel, oftentimes even just between homes. And so thinking about, oftentimes we ask people to donate gas cards so that we can have folks who are willing to drive people to the polls and to get them what they need. If we start our plans and putting them together early enough, nothing's better than knocking on someone's door and saying, hey, I'm here to register you to vote, right? And they're like, no one ever comes out here, right? So just thinking about planning ahead or having captains in different areas, up at White Earth, then we'll have a captain of Pine Point, of the Pine Point community, who can then go out and says, this is my responsibility or this is my turf to make sure I'm going to contact all the folks in this particular area. Having rallies or get out the vote parties, dropping literature, sending mail, and then using social media, again, can be a powerful tool. But the most powerful tool is having a conversation with somebody about why it's important. That personal contact. And, again, we know this. And, I think about what happens when in our community when someone passes away. Or someone is born, or there's different, events in the community. Do you need a strategic plan to figure out, like, how things are going to get done? No, right? It just happens. Like, people are fed, babies are taken care of, there's a process there, and we know what our responsibility is. And so I like to think of as Native folks, like, we're the original organizers. We know how to do this work, right? It's just figuring out how do we put voter mobilization within that context, right, of how we bring people together and have conversations. Even just starting that conversation that we have all the time about what's the first question you ask another Native person that you meet? Where are you from, right? And oftentimes that, well, I live here, but I'm from here, or I live here, but I stay at, right? And just out of that conversation, you can learn a lot about somebody, right, and their values and what they care about. And so that's how these voter registration conversations can start too. And especially if you know the people you're talking to, then you already have a relationship. Then it's on. I'm going to lift up Mille Lacs again because Cietta will be talking about resources that are available to you through an organization called State Voices. But we really need to start to plant the seed for how we're going to keep track of data and the people that we've registered to vote. Mille Lacs took a very courageous step several years ago of merging their tribal enrollment list with the voter file. So they were able to directly target all of the tribal members who weren't registered to vote. And turn them out. And we're able to cut up the turf, right, divide the turf in each community and area by having people take a look at that list and say, oh, well, I'm related to so-and-so, so I should go talk to them, or I shouldn't go talk to them, right? You know how it is, right? So it depends. But we're able then to, although it was nonpartisan, we're also able to ensure that the people were holding folks in elected office accountable, and by turning out additional people in their community to vote, their very anti-Indian legislator was removed from that particular area, and unfortunately is back now. So we got work to do in 2008. Just briefly took off my nonpartisan hat for a second. But that it can be very, very powerful. The same thing has happened in Montana. Again, Mille Lacs decided that they wanted to ensure that it was people in their own community who had access to these lists. And that after the election was over, all that data was pulled out again and will be put back in for this upcoming election cycle. And that was an agreement that they had with an organization called State Voices, or a 501c3 table, which allowed them to be able to do that. But there's so many tools at our disposal for data collection so that at the end of this year, we can say confidently, we know that we increased Native voter registration and turnout, right, by 7% in our community or in our state or whatever it is, so that, going forward, we can target Native folks who live in a particular community to turn out, and that this is a process, I think, that is becoming easier and easier. In fact, Cietta will also talk about the voter activation network. It's something called the VAN, where a lot of this information is stored. The person who owns that, right?
He's Chippewa.
He's Chippewa. What? He's one of us, which is great, right? So that makes it a lot less scary. And so I'm going to just scream that from the top of every building until, we figure out how we can do this. And so just thinking about what are the systems too that you need to put in place to ensure that, sometimes it's even an Excel spreadsheet. Here's a list of 300 people that we registered, and here's the first time we contacted them. Here's the second time we contacted them. They signed a pledge card that said they're going to vote for themselves and for their families. We're going to mail that pledge card to them right before the election, and that'll count as a piece of mail for Get Out the Vote, right? So just thinking about the unique things that we can do in order to track, right, our folks who have registered, but also to ensure that they turn out, so that we can demonstrate our power to ensure that the policies are passed that are good for us. And then finally, Heather alluded to this as well. How many of you have gotten calls where, it's, hey, this is Peggy calling from Native Vote, and I just wanted to remind you there's an election tomorrow. Did you know there's an election tomorrow? Right? Have you gotten that call before? Of course you know there's an election tomorrow, right? And I think the real thing is, we used to say for a long time, so this election's going to be really close because not a lot of people are going to turn out to vote. So your vote's really important. What you're actually saying is, hey, if you turn out to vote, you're a big weirdo. Because most people in your community are not going, right? So, we want to be part of a team, right? Or part of a family or part of a movement or something that's bigger than ourselves. So the conversation is different, right? It's that, this election is really important, and we know a lot of our members are going to be going out and voting. Can we count on you to be part of that group, right? Or part of our community members who are turning out to vote? So it's more of like, we're pack animals. We want to do things that, that other people in our community are doing. So framing it in a positive light rather than, hey, you should go because nobody else is going. That sounds like a party I want to go to, right? So, and just examples of, getting people to turn out. So when are you planning on voting? When we do these calls, when do you traditionally, what time of day do you traditionally go out and vote? How will you get there? Do you need a ride? Because I'll come get you, right? Will you vote before or after work? Will you vote alone or with a friend or family member? And the last sort of underline that I'll put under family member is a lot of the families that I worked with believe that, I can't bring my kids to the polls. Right? Because they'll be loud or they'll distract folks or, whatever. And that is so untrue. Bring your children with you. As a gentleman had mentioned earlier, that young people are a really important piece of getting their parents to turn out. There's a program called Kids Vote, which is a little mini polling place where little kids can vote for the candidates that they want on a presidential ballot that has the picture of all the candidates, which I think grown-ups should have too. That would be helpful, right? But is a way to get their parents to turn out and vote too. When I was little, my mom would always take me with her, and she'd hoist me up on her hip, and we'd fill in the little bubble together. And so when I turned 18, right, I was like, I'm here to vote, right? I ran down to my polling station. It was like a primary election for dog catcher, right? And I was like, only 13 people have voted today? It's 4 o'clock, right? What's up, democracy? So again, I'm a nerd, but those are the experiences that we can have with our families and with our children and with young families that really lay the groundwork to say that as Indian people, we're civically engaged, we're voters, and this is the way that we protect and lift up our communities. And so with that, and the last piece of just thinking about new candidate recruitment. We need more of our own people in elected office. We just elected the first Native woman to the State House in Minnesota in a special election, Susan Allen, and it's a pretty big deal. There's some of my friends in the room from Minnesota. We've been working on this for a long time, and so it's finally, but want to get to the point where we don't have to say the first Native da-da-da-da-da, right? That it just will be part of our identity and part of the process is just, that's part of who we are and how we represent our people is by running for elective office, both for tribal government, but state, local, and federal offices as well. And then just ensuring the integrity of the process, that our votes are protected, that people feel confident when they go and turn out, and that we have champions in our community who are ready and willing to have conversations with people about why it's so important. So yeah. Questions, comments, snide remarks?
Question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have, I know you talked about recording statistics for Native voters that are coming out. Is there services already in place that can record that? I work for the National Council of Urban Indian Health. We have 36 programs around the country, and we're trying to do an incentive program that we can actually say for the,
that we can actually say for the youth program that brings in the most new voters, if we can have some kind of incentive for them. Mm-hmm. What we want to do is, how do we record that information that's new? Is there already services available that you have, or?
Yes. So I'm going to have Cietta talk. I get to defer. So I'm going to have Cietta talk about that too. But there's also just to think about, it depends on where folks are located. You know, clearly in urban areas, you know, we can provide a list of where these tools are readily available, but are becoming more and more used and more widespread. So can make those accessible to you, or at least you can start to talk to folks who have that. You know, another thing to do is just think about like just how is that information recorded. You know, in lack of having you know access to the van or to Catalyst or something like that, to just record it in a Excel spreadsheet. It's not it's not fancy, but it'll also get the job done. So we'll talk a little bit about the tools that you will have access to, but I would just say figuring out a system that's uniform across the board for folks, I think is the most important thing too. Because then once we have that information, then for those new voters, when there's issues that come up around, the health of urban Indians or the health of Native folks, that we've got a whole list of people that we can activate that we've already had conversations with about why Indian health is important. Right.
And if you want to be doing any of that work using online or mobile technology, through the rockthevote.com/partners, anyone can sign up to get their own online registration tool, and it's a unique code that's assigned to them, so then everyone can be tracking each day how many people they got registered either through their mobile phone or on the website. You can do contesting, they can send it to their friends, and it's all tracked back to the individual whose form it is, or whose tool it is, and then can be added to this stuff as well, to the ground stuff.
Yes, ma'am. On a national level, how serious is the Native vote? I'm sorry. The Native vote, how serious is it courted on a national level?
That's an editorial question, but I'll answer it. So I think in 2008, I think we saw candidates step up in a pretty major way, to court the Native vote. Of course, in instances like you think about Montana, for example, will be a place where Senator John Tester is well aware that Native people delivered, frankly, his office to him, and they'll have a pretty serious plan there for turning out Native folks. On the national level, I think. Traditionally, we have seen less engagement from some political parties over others, and I think part of our job is. Did you like that? How that? Yeah.
Very so.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think that what we have to do, and I think what NCAI is also tasked to do, is to agitate political parties, all political parties, to say you should have someone in place right now in March who is figuring out what the plan is nationally for Indian country. That person I know I know there isn't an individual who's been hired nationally by the Republicans yet, and I know that there isn't someone who's been hired by the Democrats yet. And so I think for both political parties that we need to, say this should be in place, because we know that while we hear the statistic, right, we make up 1.5% of the total population, that we are strategically located in states where, I know in Minnesota, the Democrat, won the race with 3% of the vote. 1.5% of that vote were Native folks. And so just thinking about, being able to lift that up, and I know that these are conversations that NCAI will have with all political parties to say we are folks who should be taken seriously. Our vote is important and it matters, and that's why actually we talk about tracking how many folks that we've registered and then turn out, so that we can say, we made up this percentage of the electorate, and so you need to pay attention to us. So we're always building on that and can make our case.
If I may, as a follow-up question, on the national level, as far as reaching the individuals, let's say for presidential elections coming in, the state that I come from, North Carolina, President Obama carried North Carolina in the last election, and it's looking like it's going to be a little close this time. What would one do, or what would be the contact to get the message to maybe perhaps a representative of Obama that he would need the Native vote perhaps for the state of North Carolina?
Well, I would say, if you're targeting, the president specifically, that going through your state party might be the first thing that I would do. And then also consider, there are certainly, there should be a southeast or southern desk, right?
Each of the, this is not me speaking on behalf of Save Voices, just understanding the system, that in each of those states, particularly a state like North Carolina that could go either way, that the Obama campaign will be having what they're calling Operation Vote, which is all constituency-based organizations, and that you should probably reach out to them directly to talk to them about that.
And the one thing I'd add as well, just to the general question and to your specific question about North Carolina, is we have traditionally, and our leadership is very clearly on the record about this because it plays out in policy, that I isn't just for independent, I is for Indian. That the issues that we care about cut across the political party, and there are issues that Indian country cares about that are anathema to Democrats and some that Republicans don't like too much. You think about local control and governments at the local level having control over particular issues, that's kind of a Reagan thing. That's a Nixon did the special message to Congress on Indian self-determination. The self-determination era grew out of support from the Republican administration. And NCAI works really hard to engage both national parties and the national candidates from each party. So we've already reached out to the leading parties. We kind of have to do it on a day-by-day basis with the Republican primary right now. But we've reached out to the Republican National Committee and to the campaigns. We have ongoing colleagues in Indian country, some of whom folks in the room know, who've been engaged in the Obama campaign, really being clear with them about the kind of issues we care about. President Keel's message at State of Indian Nations also laid out a 5-point plan that he called upon both presidential candidates from both parties to endorse as a way of kind of building a foundation for the nation-to-nation relationship. So it's a conversation we're really closely engaged in, and we benefit in Indian country from the strategic placement of influence that Peggy talked about, and also being willing to hold both sides accountable and say the kind of things that President Keel said about, we're not for Republicans, we're not for Democrats, we're for people who are about honoring tribes as governments, and we'll go with the candidate who's willing to do that.
Thank you.
One final point, though, is that you can say all you want about your issues. You can elevate them and scream them from the top of your lungs. You can get the right audience with the right elected officials and the right candidates and campaigns. But if you go back to the very first point that Peggy made with voter registration, if you aren't registering and voting as a community, none of that actually matters, and they'll thank you for your time, and they'll move right along and do absolutely nothing about it. So what we have learned, as you can imagine with a constituency like young people, they go, great, well, you don't vote. They don't even say that. They don't have to. They say thank you and like another pat on your head, right? Yep. And it wasn't until we started saying, yes, but we're a quarter of the voting electorate, age-eligible voting electorate. We, in the state of North Carolina, have so far registered 3 times the vote margin from the last presidential election cycle. We have studied and tested and understand that when we contact people 5 times using these 3 methods, that they turn out on average 10 to 14 points higher than they did in the last cycle, and we have plans in place to do that. So we don't promise that we're going to have great turnout. We don't promise anything because part of that depends on the candidates paying attention to them. But we do tell them that if you look here, here, and here, you'll see that the electorate that you're planning on is not the electorate that's going to show up on election day because we're expanding it. We're bringing these few million new people in. And the question to you, candidate X, is are they going to vote for you? We're going to do our part. We're going to get them registered. We're going to get them turned out. It's up to you to make sure that they vote for you. And to do that, you have to address their issues and concerns. And so when you're talking about those issues and concerns and you're raising them, I believe it's way more powerful and effective if you couple it with a program like the one that Peggy just laid out. It's what gives you the kind of power behind this work. Yeah.
And there's an opportunity there too. I think sometimes when we talk about nonpartisan voter mobilization, people are like, well, if I can't tell people who to vote for, but I actually think there's some freedom in that too, and it goes directly to self-determination, right, and tribal sovereignty, and that I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, because I know that that you're smart, and that based on this information that I share with you and provide, that you can make a decision for what's best for you and what's best for your family. And often say, the conversation that sometimes we have on the door is like, oh, they're all crooks. And I'm like, I agree with you, right? I'm like, that's why I'm out here talking to people about why it's important to vote, and to say that, like, I'm not pro-Democrat, I'm not pro-Republican, I'm pro-Indian, and I'm pro my community. And, that those are the kind of conversations, because, like Peter said, we kind of, we haven't had 100% success rates with either side, right? And so that we got to also look out, for our own communities and for our own families as a top priority. And those are the kind of conversations that we can have with folks on the door.
Can I offer something?
Please.
Several years ago, there was a tribe in Nebraska that was having some problems with a county sheriff who was elected. And this sheriff happened to be a one party. And so most of the tribe was a different party. But nevertheless, it got to the point where tribal members thought up a strategy. They all switched parties in the election. They voted the sheriff out, and then went back to the other parties that they were originally. So there are things that you can do. Something you don't do every day, or every year, or every 4 years, but nevertheless, there are some things that that you have to do. But the fact is, they were active and engaged, and that's what got them where they need to be.
Got to keep them on their toes.
Let's bring Robert around with us.
That's right. So should I introduce Cietta? Okay. So one of the things that I'm most excited about in this cycle is that we're starting to have conversations about sort of using this data and figuring out what's available to us and what resources and who can we partner with to ensure that we're turning our folks out in really large numbers and that you all are supported in the field when you do this work. Cietta Kiandoli is from State Voices. She's also one of my very best friends, and so I'm excited to be doing doing this work with her, but that this is a conversation that we have, that was planted, the seed that was planted a long time ago, but now I think in this election cycle is coming to fruition of figuring out how do we best partner with different organizations that are going to help support the work that we do in our own communities and help us be prosperous. So I'm really excited that Cietta Kiandoli is here to talk to us from State Voices, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about who State Voices is and how they can be helpful to the work that we're doing in our own communities.
Thanks, Peggy. So Peggy and I have known each other for almost a decade, and I want to actually tell people to move forward. We always do trainings, and when people sit in the back, you always want them closer to you, and I want to get up, but I will also restrain myself. So a little bit about me. I grew up in this area. My father is an immigrant from Liberia. He grew up in a village in West Africa, and my mother grew up in a really poor neighborhood in St. Louis. So that is actually why I really do this work. I was actually at a family function over the weekend, and sometimes I forget how proud my family is of the work that they're doing. Somebody who I hadn't met before had heard about the work that I do and said, so, tell me about you. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, you want to know about my job, like right now in the middle of this engagement ceremony? So that's really what keeps me grounded, because I think everybody is so proud that I'm engaged in this work and that we've come so far, but there's just so much more work to do. But I think what really sealed the deal was in 2000, I was in Miami, Florida, working on the presidential election. It was my first campaign ever. And I saw how the political process plays out when people's votes are taken for granted. And how elections can go either way, even though you put your heart and soul in them. And so I think it's what actually keeps me more engaged in the civic engagement, nonpartisan side, because getting our base vote, getting Black folks, Latino folks, Native folks involved in this process in a real and meaningful way is actually the hardest job that we have to do, although folks think that we're always guaranteed to vote either way, one way or another. I think it's actually about how do we keep us engaged in the process and make sure that we understand that our voice actually matters. So that's why I do this work. And in terms of State Voices, I've been at State Voices since 2009. It's a very young organization. Peggy talked a little bit about this parachuting in and this sort of electoral strip mining. That's really part of the reason why State Voices was started. We wanted to create this advanced team for community-based organizations and states to help people that were actually doing collaborative work to have ground, have data and tools, and be sophisticated, and to be coordinating in a real way, in a meaningful way, around long-term plans. Not about, like, let's think about this election cycle because it's going to be the most important election of the year, of our lifetime, but like, how do we think about a strategy that's 5 years out? How do we think about the 400 or the 50 or 75 groups in our state? How do we actually give those folks a voice? And so that's what State Voices is really about, is like providing the tools and technical assistance on the ground for groups that are collaborating across what we call tables to do this work. So you can start this. So what we do, we help build capacity of tables and partners. You'll hear that term table a lot, have a seat at the table. It's just a really fancy way, I like to say, of doing a multi-issue coalition, right? So we work on broad-based issues that can bring in a whole group, a whole host of different organizations to do this. So we're currently in 17 states, and we work with about 620 community-based organizations that are nonpartisan across the country. We provide them with critical tools and technology. I'll go through that, but you've heard a little bit about VAN and Catalyst, and I'll explain it a little bit more. We also provide technical assistance through data staffers in the states that we operate in. And then we connect them with national C3 communities. So for instance, I'm now working with Peter. Peter and I have sort of had conversations strategically about which states we should partner in. But we do that with election protection organizations, labor unions, and we try to, a lot of times when you're on the ground, you're doing your work and you're focused on it, and there's a huge national community that sometimes is helping to shape this landscape. We try to make sure that they're connected to the tables and that it's grounded in the work that the folks in each of these states are actually doing and what is meaningful to them, not just about what the national groups have thought up in their head as important. And then we drive resources to the states to foster growth and strength. We grant a ton of money. We provide a ton of data support. We try to think of new and innovative ways to keep groups in existence, to be quite honest, leadership development pipelines, et cetera. Like, what is missing in the C3 community on the ground, and what can we do to help make certain that they have what they need to actually be successful in their campaigns? So this map is, as I look at it, inaccurate, but I'm going to go with it. We're actually in 17 states now, so we don't have Texas and New York on this map. So the states in purple, there's a group that you may have heard of, and I won't talk a lot about this, but America Votes, which does C4 work, which is they can actually endorse candidates and talk about candidate support. They have a similar table structure, but we share the same type of tools. So if you, in fact, have a C4 that you're operating with, I just bring that up so that you know that this is available to you. So in the states that are purple are where we overlap. The states that are red are strictly America Votes, although that's changing as well. And the states that are blue are strictly state voices. I will tell you this, that we're now working with what we call emerging states to help them develop tables and collaborative efforts. Those states are Montana, Idaho, Massachusetts, and in California we're looking at San Diego County to try to expand our services. And then we just now slayed this beast. We'd like to call the Tools for All Fund, which will provide 50-state data access. So in states where we don't currently exist, there will be the tools available, VAN and Catalyst, for you to have access to, but we'll not have data support. So we're actually trying to figure out how we talk to groups on the ground about actually, now that you have access to these tools, how are you raising money and thinking about building capacity to maintain the tools in your state and actually utilize them? So the conversation isn't anymore about how do we raise the money to get access. It's like, how do we build capacity to actually do this work in a really strategic way, which we think is amazing. But it's a real fundamental shift in terms of the donor support too, just so you know. Let me go to the next one. So Peggy talked, you can just keep on. Yeah. So Peggy talked a lot about what C3s can and can't do. And we like to show people this too. If you think of like this, one of our board members, Eli Lee, I don't know if anybody's worked with him in here, talks about the space-time continuum. But really all it means is what you do pre an election and post an election and like before GOTV basically, right? So if you think about all the nonpartisan things that you could be doing as a C3 organization, everything that you could do with hard dollars and with partisan work, you could probably be doing with your C3 money. And in fact, you're fertilizing the ground to actually create real change. So you can be doing issue research, lobbying, polling, educating your base, educating moderates, training future candidates, and organizing. You can be doing polling and etc. So there's just a ton of work that C3 seem to think that they cannot do, and we shy away from, and we really should be doing. And in fact, like Peggy said, we're the best messengers for it because we're based in our communities. We're connected to our communities in a way that other folks just are not. So how do the tables work? Keep going. So the other thing is that people most of the time have never heard of state voices. That's now they have, but I think it's mostly because we keep providing the tools to people. But on the ground, they take different forms. And that's on purpose because it really is about the identity of the groups. And it's not necessarily about one table or one organization shaping the landscape of a state. It's really about all the partners. So we look at ourselves as like an invisible glue. We work behind the scenes. We help build capacity of the table partners. We help share practices, share best practices, and then we help to strengthen partners' work. And that's really how we think of ourselves, very, very behind the scenes. Our table directors, in our opinion, I feel like it's like one of the hardest, most thankless jobs you could possibly have because you're not taking credit for anything, and all of it is about promoting the work of your partners and sort of herding tons and tons of cats together to develop these plans and really think strategically without actually directing anyone, which is kind of awesome, right? You can imagine that. But it is this invisible glue, and that's the work of the table. We also like to be data-driven. I mean, in a world where everybody likes to say, well, how do you prove that you've been successful, and what are the metrics that you are showing your success with? We try as hard as possible to push our partners to be more sophisticated, more strategic than other folks have. I mean, I think it's really why I kind of gravitated towards State Voices, was that I wanted to make C3 organizations and work with C3 organizations to make them as strong as possible, and so that people could stop saying that they weren't doing what they actually did, which is what happened every election cycle. It's like, but did you really turn out that many people? Well, actually now I can tell you that I have, because I've got this van and I've got this data, and I'm going to show you the list of all the people that we contacted. I'm going to tell you when I contacted them. I'm going to show you the experiment that we ran to show you how effective our messaging was, and what the mail program is that we've done, and how we coordinated with this many national groups or this many groups on the ground to actually achieve our goals. And that's what the tables do in terms of being data driven. So we create a shared metric system. We do treatment and control group experiments. So remember at the end of Peggy's presentation, she was talking about all of that messaging that you found out, like who wants to be at the party and like when you should go vote and developing a plan. A lot of that were done through these treatment and control group experiments, where we actually figured out, we worked with partner groups to create this control group, and I won't go into the details. I'll let the analyst group one day do a presentation for Peter. But at the end of the day, we tested a ton of different things and figured out what actually worked. Like, robocalls don't work for GOTV, so let's stop wasting our money having President Clinton call our people and tell them to turn out the day before the election. It is a waste of money and resources, and it doesn't work. So this is part of the work of the table too, is like, as C3 organizations, we don't have a lot of money. And so how we use those limited resources becomes extremely important. And then we're accountable, holding each other accountable to partners and to funders. I mean, at the end of the day, don't you hate when you're working with someone and they say they're going to do something and they just don't do it, and there's no one there to hold them accountable? Well, part of the table structure is you can say that, and then we have report backs, and we actually work hard to make sure that people are all doing what they say they're going to be doing. So, and then the shared tools. So this is the big lift of what the tables provide and what State Voices provide. So the Catalyst voter file. It's just a super fancy voter file. It's got all types of consumer data matched to it, telephone numbers. And what the tables provide too is that if you're working with partner organizations, a lot of times people are contacting the same people and don't necessarily even know it. So this actually helps clean it up. So like, say you contact someone and you find out that they've moved. Well, you enter that information into VAN, which is the interface that helps you do this, and then it makes it back onto the Catalyst voter file. And so the next time you're contacting them, you know the moved address, and your partners know the moved address, or they know that you've reached out to them and they've already been contacted 5 times by other groups. And so when you call them and they're like, I'm sick of hearing from you, you can actually say, well, actually, you were reached out to by this partner organization and we're calling for this. Or you could say, maybe I probably shouldn't call them this week because they've already been called 5 times, and let's figure out another way of how we speak to them. And then so the VAN is just the interface that actually allows us to do this. It lets you cut up the turf and develop walk lists and find phone lists, and it does the other. They're also trying to do some great membership enhancement work so that you can actually start tracking your members and use it as a data management tool. I know there was somebody here who asked about that. You could actually use it for that as well. And I have not seen this yet. We have a training tomorrow that I'm going to be doing on some new social media components that they're adding to the VAN voter file VAN interface, which should be really exciting, and how we connect to different social media avenues as well. And then ISSI support staff. So in each of the states where we have tables, so in each of our 17 states, and in fact in most of the emerging states that we've been working with, they're hiring an in-state data staff person that helps you actually use the tools. So as our ED likes to say sometimes, it's like everybody has this gym membership but nobody actually goes to the gym. Like, it's great to have the tools in the state, but if there's actually no trainer there to show you how you can use the tools and how to connect it to your plans, it's actually a useless piece of equipment and will sit in your basement and not be used for many, many years. We put the data staff in the state to actually show you how to use the tools and connect it to your work. And then we added salsa online organizing tools because a lot of the groups said we need more membership management stuff. So you can do newsletters and email lists and a ton of other items through the salsa online organizing tools. And then in a lot of our states, we do these joint polls and models. Has anybody ever heard of modeling before?
It's my fallback career, but.
So, by the way, I never thought I would know this much about data. I'm like a field person for real. So me talking about this tells you that almost anybody can do this. It's not rocket science, I promise you. So the modeling is, just easiest to say, birds of a feather flock together. You'll hear modeling and targeting. It's basically, we take a bunch of different data, we take a bunch of different issues, we call people, find out how they may be weighted, one being like they don't care anything at all about healthcare reform, and 10 being that maybe they really, really care about it and they're going to act. And then we score them based on how they answer questions. We apply that to their name, and then we create these models that help you target better who you're speaking to. Does that make sense to folks? Okay. So the models, we also create a ton of models in our states to better talk to folks. So you don't necessarily want to be talking to the same people who on the faith model, may not be the same people that you're talking to about Planned Parenthood issues. And so that becomes very important when you're doing collaborative work. But also if you're thinking about large-scale campaigns that you guys are doing together, how you then take the best messengers to talk to different folks. And then in our states, and we're actually thinking about how we do this even better, this legal access and resources. We have a lawyer on retainer nationally that the table directors have direct access to. So when there are issues that are table-wide or trainings, et cetera, we try to get them filtered through we're not loaded, and you know lawyers are expensive. But we try to have a direct connection to legal access for folks to do that. And so, but one of the things we have been thinking about is this is actually something that the states need, and maybe even need state-specific folks. So how do we think about providing this in the states? So that's the basic of the share tools. So how you can, the structures of the table really. C3 compliance, VAN MOU. So none of us want to go to jail. So everybody has to sign an MOU that says they will not be doing any partisan work with the VAN that we're all sharing information on. Commitment to table's overall vision, mission, and purpose. If you're not committed to collaboration, this may not be a place that folks are thinking about. We're trying to build real change in our states. And we know that we cannot do that separately anymore. And so what may not necessarily be in a campaign that is as important to you, in the long term, building that relationship with groups that may not have been traditional allies and having them have your back on the issues that are important to you, we've seen it's become a very important strategy for our long-term success. And so part of the work of the table is that people are committed to collaboration and committed to the overall vision, mission, and purpose, and committed to using the data. Nobody wants to pay for a tool that nobody's using, and so committing to use the data and then submitting plans to the table to foster collaboration and coordination. Again, this is all about being accountable to each other. So We help people write plans. If you are struggling with it and don't have the staff in your state, we help you do the targeting that you might need to do. Because ultimately, we want each of the individual groups to be strong and as a table to be even stronger, right? And so part of that is giving you the support that you need to do that. I don't have to go too much into this. All of our tables are structured very differently, and that's because they take on the identity of the partners on the ground, but also the states that they're in, they exist in, and what are the issues that are important to folks. So Washington, which I'll give has the most groups. Washington State has a civic engagement subgroup and a data research and technology subgroup and leadership development programs and an infrastructure subgroup and a community of color focused subgroup. In some of the states, they have strictly a Latino subgroup that works within the table. So there is a place for everyone. You don't have to come in and be a part of necessarily the larger structure. And there's definitely, in a lot of the states, they identify that there are different sectors of this work and how do we connect them all and make sure that everybody has a voice.
And in Washington State in particular, Native Vote Washington is actually part of the C3 table there. Right. They're partners.
I would also say, too, the other piece of this is that we have these leadership committees in each of our states that help to structure the tables. And where possible, I tell people it's just like our process here. If you want to have your voice, you have a voice in shaping the way the table is. A lot of times people feel like they don't. And that it is what it is, and it is structured the way it's going to be structured. And that is actually not the case, and sometimes people take it for granted and don't get involved in the process. And it's just as similar with the voting process. So I think in terms of thinking about this is how do you get your folks and people that you care about on the leadership committees of a lot of these tables as well. So what's next? So this is just, and I should change this, but redistricting, our GOTV plans, we're working on voter registration work. Voter ID bills are going to be huge for our folks this year in pretty much every state that we're operating in. Election protection work and voter ID work is probably the #1 issue in terms of this election cycle because it's hit almost every state and it significantly impacts underrepresented folks in the electorate. We'll be doing, I have 2012 elections. I actually need to put on here too that we're changing the tone and we're doing what we call 2012-2013 plans. So our plans now are looking at 18 to 24 months because what often happens is right after the election, yay, we've won, or yay, we've lost, whatever it is. And then the work actually starts. And you have all this legislative work and issue work that you're doing in your states, and there's no money for it because we haven't been talking about this. And then we start fundraising or doing work around that in 2013, and it's almost too late. And the money comes, if you're lucky, in June or July or August. And your groups, in terms of their ability to build capacity, just sort of deteriorates. And so that we're in this really tough situation every year. So we actually are trying to do these 2012-2013 plans and change the dialogue about what the real work is. Election work is very important, but it's just as important to figure out what we're doing after the election. That's why we're actually engaging in these elections, right? So in that sense, we're looking at these budget battles. We're looking at how we engage on ballot initiatives that may be even city-based. And then we're looking at doing a lot of tests and experiments as well. And then Peggy asked me to show you what the voter file looks like. There's a lot of stuff on modeling. And you want another? One day we'll ask Peter if we can do this, another one on this. But I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what the voter file, what VAN looks like. So as you're creating lists and cutting lists to do your work and picking activist codes, etc., it looks really complicated. It's a little time consuming in the beginning, but once you get it, it just clicks. I was super, super scared learning how to use Van. The first time in 2005 is when I used it. I had been learning how to cut turf and do lists with like actual maps and Xerox machines and like with a highlighter. So to go from that to this is a little scary, but it becomes second nature. It makes your work so much easier. They actually tell you the routes to walk sometimes. I mean, it's also an amazing way to track things. So that's just a snapshot of how it looks when you're starting to do the work.
I mean, and imagine that we're going to be able to get to a point where we can say we want to contact, if we're talking about young people, right, between the ages of 18 to 29 who live in, Pine Point, who've been identified that their most important issue is, having after-school programs. Like, we can literally do that and figure out how we can pull those lists. Or imagine sending out a piece of mail to Native women, right, in the Red Lake Nation. Like, you can do that once we start to use this tool, and just allows us to really deliver the message and communicate even more effectively directly with Native folks.
Great. That's my spiel. Do folks have any questions? I was either very thorough or
they're still trying to make sense out of that.
That last line.
Go ahead. I'm Howard Humitua from Santa Ana Pueblo in New Mexico, in the Southwest. I commend you guys all for having the passion that you do and getting the Native vote or the youth and everybody else to vote to make a difference. But I think that's only half the battle, because once you get your candidate who probably lied to you about what his agenda is into office, especially Congress, senators, representatives, congressmen, then they have to, when they take office, they raise the right hand and swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And in that Constitution, there are certain guarantees to Native Americans made by the United States government a long time ago. For as long as the sky is blue, the grass is green, the rivers flow. Little big man for some of you guys. And how do we ensure that they do that, or whose job is it then to follow up and keep these guys' feet to the fire, so to speak? Is it the tribal leaders? Is it NCAI? Is it us as voters? Is it you guys as people with this passion? in your education, do you teach anything about the Constitution? Do you tell people what they should expect from the United States government, I guess?
So I think that the answer to your question is yes. Okay. It's all, I think too often what we do is we say, well, now we're going to leave it up to Peter, right? Or we're going to leave it up to NCAI.
Always a bad plan.
Right, always in the off-election years. And I think, the opportunity is to say NCAI is a place where, we have relationships and where we can get assistance in helping to navigate that process. But ultimately, it is up to our tribal leaders, but it's also up to us as individuals to contact our local elected officials and to build that relationship and to say, the summer after the election, we're extending an invitation to you to come back to our community to talk to us about how things have been going, to continue to have those conversations because, and to also call our elected officials when we think they're doing a good job. They only hear from us when things are bad, right? And so to build that relationship and say, hey, Senator Franken, in the Indian Health Service bill, one of the things that he did was made sure that rape examination kits were included in the reauthorization of that because IHS in the past didn't pay for them, and we know that our Native women experience sexual assault at a much higher rate than any other population. And calling the senator and saying thank you for hearing us. And so thinking about opportunities to, have forums or to invite elected officials into our community. When you're out here for something, just stopping by and, saying, we appreciate what you've been doing. But in New Mexico, going down to Santa Fe and to visiting, even, with your elected officials and keeping them accountable, using the same tools that we have at our disposal during the election, in those off-election years, to continue the conversation, to write letters to the editor, to build pressure, to make sure that they honor those commitments, and to encourage people to think about, like you said, like the Constitution. If it's clear anywhere about what our relationship is supposed to be with the government, it's that piece. And sometimes it's just us educating the candidates on what that agreement actually means.
And the two things I'd say to your question is, I was really struck by Heather's kind of example about Social Security earlier. I think the Native Vote campaign, much larger than NCAI, as Peggy said, is about envisioning a future where people look at Indian issues and they say, why are they paying that much attention to them? And we can have a cycle like Heather identified where Native people are voting, so people in Congress pay attention to Native issues, so Native people continue to vote, and the cycle goes on. And that's something that has been building. Because you look back even a decade ago and there was a lot less engagement, even thinking about the last couple of State of Indian Nation addresses and the number of particularly members of Congress from the Republican side who have been really self-conscious about identifying their issues with Indian country and talking about their commitment to Indian country. And I think it's part of us being smart and saying thank you when they do the right thing and when they support Indian country, and to underscore also Peggy's message that I think it's something that's owned together. And part of the work with partners like Rock the Vote and State Voices is also about having folks from other communities raising Indian country issues up,
That's right.
educating them about it. We talk about within the Embassy of Tribal Nations, when we have school groups and others come, we talk about teaching friends how to be friendly. There's a lot of people out there who don't know how they can support Indian country, and that's another part of the work that we do. Cecilia?
Hi, good morning. I apologize for being late, but I was trying to do 30 things. I'd like to ask you a question. I'd like to ask a request. I'm asking on behalf of Indian radio stations. We have an opportunity to do voter education over Indian airwaves. At least 5 months. April, May, June, July, August. Just do voter education. And how do we frame that voter education for the listening audience, where you have high rates of poverty, high rates of unemployment? How do we frame it in such a way that even those who are powerless can get excited about participating in the process? So my question to you is, on my reservation, I'm talking to the radio station on how we can do this. However, I need some money to pay them. How can we raise money to pay Indian radio stations like the Navajo Nation radio station, KILI, KINI, all these Indian radio stations to do voter education over the airwaves? Because you're going to reach more people over the airwaves than going community by community by community. This voter education has to be framed in such a way that that person who is totally dependent on Indian health, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, can understand that the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Indian Health Service budgets are dependent on which congressman and which senator votes and supports that budget. How do we frame it in such a way so those people can understand that the importance of voting and who you vote for can make a difference in your budget for health and education and roads? True? And so this is, how do we frame that? And so I'm asking for some support and help in how we can raise money to pay these Indian radio stations to do the voter education, to reach this segment, this population of people in Indian communities who historically don't participate and who are going to be the greatest impacted by the budgets, by health, education, transportation, housing, et cetera, et cetera. How do we tie that into it? So that's what I'm asking. How can I raise money? Where can I get money for my radio station to do this voter education? Thank you. I'm asking for money.
Right. So to clarify, you want money? I think, so I'll speak briefly about NCAI's campaign, and then Heather had some great comments earlier about the radio engagement that Rock the Vote's doing, and maybe Peggy, you want to add something too. But from the NCAI side, we are really currently, we have a small grant from the Ford Foundation, and the rest of the work that we're doing is kind of in-kind staff support to get Native Vote going, but we are doing a lot of work to engage funders and even look at the corporate sector. And frankly, there are a number of tribes who are also interested in investing, knowing the stakes, understanding the difference that in some of these small states, you know, $10,000 can make a difference to get access to some of these tools, that I have a trainer to help folk use the tools that State Voices has in a state like North Dakota or a place like Montana where they're not as deeply engaged at this point in time. So those are the kind of things that we are doing, and certainly my ears perked up as Heather made some comments about radio, given how important it is in a lot of Native communities as a communications tool. So maybe Heather, do you want to say?
Yeah, so hi, Celia. My name is Heather Smith. I'm the president of Rock the Vote. And one of the programs, well, a lot of our work, I should say, is really based on where are young people, where are those who need to be registered, where are those who need that education, and how do we reach them? And radio has been a great vehicle for that for us for over the years. And so we call it Radio Rocks the Vote. We actually don't pay the radio stations, but instead provide all the resources they might need to do the work. So we support and can actually work with you if this is of interest in identifying musicians and artists who they might not otherwise be able to get to do PSAs for their radio stations, to be filming or recording audio PSAs throughout the campaign to do stuff like, hey, this is so-and-so for radio station X. Don't forget that this really matters in our, in our community Y, and the voter registration deadline is on Thursday. If you haven't registered yet, go to the radio station's website and get your download your registration form now. And so we do the work of reaching out to artists, bringing them together, doing the recordings, and providing those to the radio stations, who then use it as public service content for their community. And then there's a lot of other stuff that goes on around that. We also support radio stations by doing contesting. So stations across a particular area might be competing with each other to see who can get the most of their listeners to register to vote. We then provide prizes like concerts or flyaways to the conventions or things like that that might encourage those radio stations to be promoting voter registration or election day voter engagement. And so looking kind of both locally what's working and then nationally, those are a couple of the things that we're doing. Yeah.
I was going to add to that. My name is Jane Parrish, and I'm from Navajo Nation. I just started with Heather a few weeks ago and the staff. And actually that's what we're doing right now with a lot of the tribal radio stations, or I'm doing in Arizona, and that's exactly the approach because of funding. And they're more than willing to do PSAs and using a lot of the local Native artists to do it. So we actually have an agreement now with KTNN and KYAT, and they're all, as you know, a lot more of the tribal language radio stations are coming up. We just have 2 new additions to do, not just KTN, but now we have about 3 or 4 Navajo radio stations, and it's Navajo all the time. So it's, it's a really good way for the approach to do that. So
I know we do PSAs and get the vote out, but we do PSAs and get the vote out and all that stuff, but to me that's not enough.
Agreed.
That's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
We have to get the people to understand why it's important to take part in the process. They need to understand how it's important it affects their daily life. That school bus coming to pick up their kids, whether there's enough providers at the clinic. These are the things that I'm talking about, and the reason I talk about this passionately, because I do that. I do that in my community, but if you come from large communities, a lot of us work full-time, and we do that on our free time. We can't be out there every day, every week. So our radio stations are a really good place to do in our tribal languages, to tell our people why you should participate. It's not registering to vote. That's always going to be there. But why it's important for them to take part. What is the historical relationship? And one of the things we use is our veterans. How many of you use your veterans? Abuse them. You know, they always say they go and fight in the wars, they went to protect our country, the right for democracy, all that stuff, you know. So there's all these approaches, but my thing is this. There are people in our community who do not listen to radio, who do not listen to Rush Limbaugh. They don't listen to Fox, and they don't listen to the candidates. They don't. When you're in poverty, you're spending all your time just getting by day after day after day. How many of you understand what I'm saying? They don't pay attention. So these are the people, and there's a lot of them out there who we need to wake up. And they need to understand from our perspective as Indian people, in our languages, the importance of participating. Yeah, we do voter registration, we do all that, but that is just a small piece of how do we get our people totally engaged in the process so they will continue to participate from that day forward. That's what I'm asking, and how do we create that?
One of the things that we've done in the past is when we work with different tribal communities and do training or bring together folks who are working on this voter mobilization, is literally to just have like roundtable and to talk about what issues are most important, and then have folks from that particular group craft the PSAs, and they're then the ones who go on the radio stations and talk about it, so that it's directly connected to the very issues that you brought up, you know, or that it's done in, you know, in Ojibwe, and you know, just figuring out, and those oftentimes are the radio ads or the PSAs that really tend to make the difference, because they're like, oh, that's my auntie, or that's my cousin, or, you know, they're speaking directly to these issues that concern young people. And so that also is just another opportunity as well when we're thinking about, you know, ways to engage radio stations. As far as the dollars to go along to pay for it, you know, that's where, of course, it always gets tricky. But Cecilia would love to just keep talking about, like, maybe there's an opportunity to figure out different ways to, you know, work across tribes to just even put together a proposal or figure out some next steps on this.
Yeah, I'd love to do that.
So I'm not, I guess, what is it that we're paying the radio stations? I guess I'm trying to figure out what costs them money. Is it the production of the content? Is it, because there might be resources that we have access to that we can help support that. And then that could be part of, as we've just been talking about all morning. Yeah, I don't think there is one silver bullet, but it's a commitment and a conversation that happens on the radio in the high schools through like the democracy class program, where you're talking about and spending an hour with the students about the history of, you know, of the country and the role of the Constitution and what that means and what your power is in this process. That then you know, you're hearing about it on the radio. It's being talked about when you show up at, you know, at various events in the community. It's, you know, you're seeing people talk about it on television. The candidates start addressing it once, you know, once the numbers are proven, and ultimately you see the whole community participating in it. If it, you know, and it's not I guess I think about it as like a 360 experience where that process happens and you're hearing about it from all sides and all aspects. But you know, maybe it's a conversation for offline, but if there, we have access to a lot of pro bono resources, so if that's something that is, as opposed to paying for the time, which it might be, but if there's pro bono like production and that type of thing, we might be able to support that.
For our radio station, we just want to be able to pay them some money to do this, because they're nonprofit. A lot of our Indian radio stations are nonprofit, and they struggle sometimes to pay their light bill. So, and then they won't let us do shows without charging them. But I want to be able to give them some money to help them. That's all.
So I'm just going to piggyback on what Peggy said earlier, which is that part of it is how you package it in a proposal. And then getting it to the right donors and folks that have access to it. So I would say, at least in states where our tables are, I think, first of all, we don't just like do blanket checks and money. So I don't want to set an expectation that that's what we do. But I think in terms of thinking strategically about how we create some proposals where this is about a larger campaign and how we engage folks in different communities, I think that how we package that and develop a proposal and get it to the tables, because part of what we do is if it's a part of a coordinated plan, we do in fact try to raise funds for these coordinated plans for the tables. And so that's another avenue of thinking too, is like, how do you actually make this about a proposal and long-term strategy in terms of engaging the Native vote and Native communities through not just this election cycle, but is it a 2012-2013 piece that you're thinking of? And that it's a piece of your overall program, not the full program. Because I think, to be quite honest, it might be a harder sale as a standalone. But if it's a part of a larger program, it might be a lot easier. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, let me make a quick additional public service announcement / reminder. So you have this pledge card. So if you want to take a couple more, there's extra materials in the room. There's the jump drives and the which have our Native Vote toolkit on them that you can take home. Please do feel free to take these, fill it out and drop it off at the registration desk, or you can leave it with us here. We're also very interested in this survey, which I think is the second or third page in your packets, that is about how tribes are coordinating their elections with national elections to increase voter participation. So if you get a chance to fill that out for your community, we would love to have that back. Turn it back now or turn it back at the registration table. And
can I say one thing?
Please.
I think I buried the lead too. I also didn't say that we provide this at no cost. So I buried the lead on that. We provide all these tools and access at no cost to folks. So when your organizations come to the tables, it's actually free to them to use. Bury the lead. Sorry, I just
I'm glad you said that. It's a strong way to finish. Speaking of other resources, you'll be seeing all of this stuff, including the video of this session, posted on nativevote.org. So do go there, sign up for updates. You can actually fill out this lovely pledge card if you want to take it home as a souvenir for your family or give it to your grandma or something. You can actually fill out the pledge card online. The final thing I'd say is in the solarium room right now, which is down the hall and down the stairs, or down the elevator here and along the hallway, they're doing an advocacy brown bag luncheon, so there's free lunch there. So we give you free tools here, and you can go get free lunch if you'd like. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, guys. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Before we mess up our makeup.
Yeah.